Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Had the Spider-Man Quirk Part 2. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Night fell over the city as the sun dimmed and the building lights illuminated the darkness with their neon glow. The nightlife brought few out into the streets, but still enough for the hustle and bustle that was life in the city. Amongst the crowd was a young man, dressed in black sweatpants, black shoes to replace his iconic red, and a black jacket over a dark green hoodie. His face was marred by shadow as he nonchalantly walked among the people. His green eyes turned upward to the tallest building, as he mentally prepared himself and made his way towards the structure. Isuku Midoriya, a boy that was bitten by a radioactive generically altered spider, was about to do something he never would have considered doing in his life. Bend the law. See, over the past 4.5 months, Isuku had been working and developing a device called a web shooters to work in conjunction with his new spider Quirk. The initial tests at the warehouse were promising and showed their diverse practicality. But Isuku felt they needed a bigger test run, something the warehouse could not provide, and that required him to go into the city to fully test them out. Now, normally Isuku would be hard-pressed to break the law, other than to save someone else's life, but he felt he had to do this. He couldn't rationally explain why he was doing this. Maybe the spider bite had altered his personality somehow, making him more confident than he was before. Maybe the feeling of power made him want to prove himself more after being useless for most of his life. Or maybe it was that rare rebellious teenage thing he heard about. Whatever it was too late to stop now. Too late to go back now, he thought to himself as he snuck into the fire escape of the tallest building. He subtly made sure to avoid the security cameras as his body was shrouded in his invisibility, until finally he made it to the roof and decloaked. After making sure there were no cameras on the roof, he pulled out his gear. The web shooters, a utility belt with spare web cartridges, his improvised mask, and black gloves. The last one was so he didn't leave fingerprints for cops. Geez, I almost sound like a cat burglar with this stuff, he thought to himself as he strapped the shooters on. Making sure they were secure, he clipped the belt to his waist and put the mask on his head. He left it partially off until he felt ready. He looked down to the bustling city below as he felt a twinge of nervousness and regret, as his invisibility fluctuated in response. You know, maybe this is a bad idea, he thought to himself as he felt the urge to turn back. But no one ever said the path would be easy. He got up on the edge and clung to the side of the building. The cold wind swept across the skyscraper as Isuku gripped tightly to the concrete edge. He took this moment to rationalize his actions. If he jumped, he could risk everything he had worked so hard for. His life, his chance to become a hero, everything on a simple test that he could just wait to conduct at UA. Would it truly be worth risking it all on a stupid test? But then again, the acceptance rate at UA was infamous for being so low and the difficulty rate so high his chances of success were limited. Even with All Might's powers. Would he even pass at all? Don't think, he thought to himself as he leaned back, and with a calming breath pulled the mask over his face. Just jump. And with that he jumped off the building. Small bits of concrete clung to his fingertips as the last bit of nervousness carried with him. And then he fell, plummeting towards the ground at high speed. The whole world was turned upside down as fell towards the earth. His invisibility fluctuated as he plummeted to the ground, and he for a moment felt he was going to die. Until he remembered his web shooters and fired 2 lines of web into the air. The strands of web trailed off as for a moment he felt fear that he missed and would now be nothing more than a stain on the ground. Until the webs went taut and he swung away from busy streets. He took a moment to admire the city lights as he swung high into the air. A small smile on his face as he felt a sudden rush of adrenaline and excitement as he swung through the city. This awesome, he thought as he swung high above the streets. I've never felt anything like this. Holy cow. He noticed his reflection in the glass skyscrapers as the people in the building hadn't noticed him yet, but they were starting to turn. Oh shit. That's right. Invisible. Turn invisible. His body disappeared from view as he continued to swing through the city. Phew, that was close, he thought to himself as he swung across the streets. All right, just need to hold it until downtown, then I find an alleyway and make it to the train station. Isuku thought to himself as he continued to swing, using the buildings to build momentum and almost fly across the streets. He flipped in the air, somersaulted and performed great acrobatic feats as he fully tested the applications of his web shooters. Still, this is pretty awesome. Is this what All Might feels all the time? He asked himself as he held in the urge to cry out in excitement. After roughly 10 minutes he made it downtown and he landed on a deserted rooftop. His body returned to normal as he looked around for anyone inside in relief when no one was around. He pulled his mask off his face as he took in multiple breaths to calm down his racing heart. That was amazing. Wish I could have recorded that. He breathed out before he released a calming breath. Okay, need to get back home. Mum will start to get worried if I don't get home right away. Crash. Suddenly he heard a small crash in the alleyway as he turned his head towards the sound. What the? He asked himself as he made his way to the alley. He looked around the deserted alley until he heard more sounds coming from further in. He crawled down the walls of the alleyway as he followed the sound. He crept along the walls as he soon came across the source of the sound. There at the dead end of the alleyway was a small girl no older than maybe 5 or 6 years old. She had long bluish-white hair with red eyes, pale skin, and a long light yellow-brown horn on the right side of her head. She was wearing a plain, short-sleeved dress, which was a dirty and a pale tan color. Bandages were wrapped around both her arms and legs, stopping at her wrists and ankles. A child? He asked himself as she seemed to be desperately trying to find somewhere to hide or escape. Suddenly he heard footsteps coming from the other side of the alley as several men dressed like thugs walked towards the girl who turned in fright. "Ah, there you are. We were so worried about you," one of them said mockingly as they sauntered over to her. Who the heck are these guys? Isuku asked himself as he watched the thuggish-looking men walk towards her. That wasn't very nice of you, running away like this. You know how mad Kai will be when he finds out, he said as they drew closer. The small girl pressed her back against the wall as tears began to form in her eyes. Something that made Isuku very angry. Please, no, she whimpered as they drew closer. I don't want to go back. Isuku watched angrily as they drew closer to the girl. He wanted to go down there and stop them, make them leave her alone. But he knew he shouldn't do that and instead go find the police, another hero, or anyone to save her. But he just couldn't do that. He couldn't just leave her to these men. He had already been in trouble once with interfering in hero work. Not to mention he was using his quirk without a license and no supervision. What would happen if he did it again? No, no, she cried out as they grabbed her by the arm. Come on, you little brat. The man yelled as he pulled her arm. She continued to struggle as they pulled her away. Please, someone. Help. That was it. That one cry for help. That was all he needed to make up his mind. He pulled his mask over his face as he glared at the men and his body disappeared. Stop your whining. Don't make this any harder than it has to. Whip. Suddenly they heard a strange noise, as a strand of web shot from the darkness and latched onto one of the men and pulled him into the shadows. His screams caused the others to turn back to the alley as their ally disappeared. His screams suddenly silenced as quiet filled the alley. Shin, where are you? One of the thugs yelled as they looked for the man. The men looked around as they searched for their comrade until his body fell from the shadows covered in a web-like cocoon, and he dangled above them. Shin. Their ringleader growled as a bone-like spike grew out of his body. The young girl looked up in stunned silence before she was shoved into the garbage. All right, where are you? He yelled out as the other men activated their quirks. One man's fingers shifted into gun-like barrels, while another held balls of fire in his hand. Another shed his coat to reveal bulked-up muscles with bone-like plating on his arms, while another sparked electricity from his fingertips. Isuku watched from the shadows as he analyzed each man's quirk. A bone manipulator, a gun user, a pyromancer, a strength enhancer, and an electric conductor. 4 emitters and 1 heteromorphic class. I should take the one with the gun barrels first, can't let him draw attention to cops or heroes in the area. Then I need to deal with the pyromancer and electric user after that, limit their range abilities. The big guy will be tough, and I can't tell what the bone guy's deal is. Can he shoot them, or can he use them as blades? His analytical brain analyzing their quirks and coming up with multiple plans to deal with them. But most of all, I got to get them away from that girl, he thought as he sprang into action. He fired 2 shots from his web shooters as he jammed up the gun user's barrels with web. Gah! What the hell is this crap? He yelled before another web shot him in the leg and he was pulled and hung upside down above the alley. Izuku's fist collided with his face as he knocked out the man. Good thing I learned to pull my punches, otherwise I'd have killed him with that punch. Izuku thought to himself as he turned his attention back to the men that could see him now. Shit. There he is. The pyromancer yelled as he chucked a fireball at Izuku's position, only to miss as Izuku jumped out of the way and fired another web shot at the man, covering his face in the webs. The man yelled as he tried to pull the web off his face. Grr. That's it. Where are you? The muscle-bound man yelled as he picked up trash cans and threw them, while the electric user shot bolts of lightning from his fingertips. Seeing no other choice, Izuku leapt from the shadows and fired his web shooter, snagging the wall behind them and pulling himself towards them. His feet collided with the large man as he sent the man flying back and into a wall. His spider sense went off again as he used his webs to grab the trash lid and used it to redirect the lighting blast from the thug. He then used his impact web to blast the electric user, as he was instantly pinned to the wall, knocking him out when his head collided with the brick wall. Landing on the alley floor, his spider sense instantly went off, as the big man roared and threw his fist at Izuku. But Izuku managed to dodge his fist as it collided with the concrete and created a small crater. The big man roared as he threw his fist wildly at the young man, who relied on his spider sense and training with all might to avoid his punches. Stay still you twerp and let me hit you, the man yelled as he tried to hit the boy. No way. Have you ever been punched before? It seriously hurts? Izuku quipped as he dodged the man's fists. Did I just quip? Why did I quip? Must be the mask? He thought to himself as the man threw his fist only to have Izuku catch it and hold it back, causing the man to stare in shock. Here, let me show you. He then punched the man in the stomach, as the man's eyes widened, and he barfed up his breakfast then passed out. See, I told ya it would hurt. His spider sense instantly went off as he ducked under a bone-like shard that came flying towards him. He spun around to see the ringleader as more bone spike grew out of his body and he launched them at the young man. Izuku dodged and evaded them with ease, as he shot 2 quick strands of web at the man and grabbed his hands in the thick strands. He only had a second to register before he was pulled across the alley towards Izuku, who kicked him across the face and knocked him out with a single blow. And stay down, Izuku said as he looked around at the unconscious thugs. Okay. Now where did... He heard a can rustle as he looked over to see the frightened young girl as she hid behind a dumpster. Oh, there you are. Are you all right? Did they hurt you? He asked as he stepped towards her only for her to scuffle back further. Whoa, easy there, I'm not going to hurt you, he said as she still crawled back in fear of him. It's okay, I'm not a bad guy, why won't? He paused for a moment before he realized. Oh, the mask. He pulled the mask up to his forehead as he showed his face to her. See, I'm just a regular guy, he said as she paused and looked at him. It's just a mask, I'm not going to hurt you, I promise, he said gently hoping to calm her. I'm Izuku, he said pointing to himself. What's your name? He asked as she looked at him cautiously. Arie, she said as Izuku smiled. Arie, that's a nice name. Do you live near here? He asked as she shook her head. No? What about family? Do you have any family? He asked as she paused then shook her head. No family. Who were these guys? Why were they after you? He asked as she curled herself up in fear. No, it's okay. You don't have to tell me. Just come here, I'll get you somewhere safe, he said as he stretched his hand towards her, and she shuffled back in fear. He recoiled a little as he saw the fear in her eyes and wondered what these men had done to her to instill that fear. He worried that he wouldn't be able to help her when he remembered something as he smiled softly and took off one of his gloves. Hey, it's okay. I know you're scared, and I don't blame you. But I promise you everything is going to be all right now. Do you want to know why? He asked as she shook her head, and he gave her a bright smile. Because I'm here. His smile seemed to comfort her as he stretched out his hand to her. She stared cautiously as she slowly reached out and took her hand in his and he closed it gently. She felt scared for a moment before she relished in the gentle embrace of his hand. Something she was unfamiliar with her entire life. Slowly she stepped forward as Izuku smiled at her reassuringly. She slowly stepped forward, before she latched herself on him and embraced him. Izuku was stunned for a moment before he wrapped his arms around the small girl. The small girl clung to him as he gently rubbed the back of her head in comfort. There, he said as he comforted her. Everything is going to be okay, he said as he let her hold him for as long as she needed. Eventually, he had to let her go, despite the clinging grip she had. Now, he said, placing his glove back on. Let's get you out of here in. Suddenly his head began to pound like a jackhammer as his spider sense went haywire. He pulled the mask over his face, just as the ground began to break and sharp spikes shot out of the earth. He managed to use his reflexes as he grabbed the girl and jumped high above the sharp concrete. He landed on the wall, clinging to the bricks with his grip until his spider sense went off again and he jumped away from more brick spikes that shot out from his last position. He soared in the air as Arie screamed in fright before Izuku shot a web line onto a clothesline and hung above the spike-riddled alley. He cursed as his spider sense directed him towards the source of the attacks. "What the hell is wrong with you? Who are you?" he demanded as a man emerged from the shadows. The man was pale with a narrow build and short, shaggy auburn hair parted to the right. His eyes were thin, with the irises small and gold and rather long lower eyelashes and small eyebrows. On his left ear were 3 beaded lobe piercings. He wore a black dress shirt with matching dress pants, a pale gray tie around his neck, and a belt with a long thin buckle around his waist. Over this, he wore a dark olive green bomber jacket with thick purple fur and white lace-up sneakers. His most noticeable features were the white surgical gloves he wore on his hands and the magenta plague mask he wears over his mouth, which was tipped and embroidered with gold. Arie stiffened in Izuku's grasp, something he instantly noticed before he turned his attention back to the man. What the hell is this guy's problem? He could have hit Arie with that attack. Is he a hero? No, I don't recognize him, and my spider sense is going haywire around him? Who the heck is this guy? He narrowed his gaze as he eyed the man. Whoever he is, I need to be careful, he surmised before he began to ask questions. What the hell is wrong with you? You could have hit Arie, Izuku demanded again as the man narrowed his gaze and almost seemed to glare at Arie. The girl trembled in his arms before the man appeared to have a more dignified expression on his beak-covered face. Apologizes, I thought you were one of these low-lifes that wanted to hurt Arie, he said in a way that rubbed Izuku the wrong way, but he shook it off as the strange man gestured to the unconscious thugs. I was merely overreacting to someone stranger approaching her. I'm sorry if I startled you, he said as Izuku glared behind his mask. Overreacting? Is this guy for real? He almost turned me and Arie into kebabs, he thought as he lowered himself down with his web, taking note of how much tighter Arie seemed to grip him. I'm guessing you know her, he asked as he kept holding onto the girl. You can say that. She's my daughter and she wandered off too far while playing a game. She tends to get carried away and hurt herself sometimes. Izuku's eyes narrowed at the emotionless way he said daughter like it wasn't even true to him. I thank you for protecting her from these hoodlums. But I'll be taking Arie back with me. She needs to come home now, he said as he gestured to the girl to come to him, only for her to shrink away in fear. Come along Arie, it's time to come home, he said as stretched his gloved hand to her. Izuku glared at the man as his spider sense continued to warn him of the absolute danger that man was. Please, she whispered into Izuku's ear, don't let him take me, she silently begged as Izuku's mask lenses widened and then glared at the man. Your daughter, she seems scared, Izuku said as he slowly wrapped his right arm tighter around her, while his left arm inched out of view. His left fingers inched close to the trigger of his web shooter, prepared for anything. Well, she knows she's going to be scolded for getting into trouble, the man tried to convince him as Izuku glared. Children will do anything to avoid being scolded. But these bandages, Izuku mentioned as he gestured to the small girl's arms and legs. They don't look like something you get while playing around, he accused as the man's gaze narrowed dangerously. She happens to fall a lot. She's quite a clumsy troublemaker, he reasoned, but both Izuku's spider sense and bullshit sense were going off. This much, and to the point, she's trembling right now? Not to mention the entire time she hasn't said a word to you. If I didn't know any better, his lenses narrowed into an almost intense glare. I'd say you're the one doing this to her. The man's eyes glared dangerously as his hand slowly inched towards his glove. That's a very rude thing to say, accusing a father of hurting his child. You don't know what you're saying, he said with a hint of venom in his voice. All I know is, a small girl is frightened, and if I look the other way, I'll never consider myself a hero. He glared back as the man grew increasingly annoyed. Boss, a small groan came from the ringleader as both eyes widened. Boss, Kai, watch out, this guy, he's dangerous, the man groaned out as he reached for him. Izuku's eyes snapped back to the man as both seemed to realize what had just been revealed. Boss, Kai, they work for him. Izuku freaked out as he held onto Arie tighter. Kai turned his glare down to the man as he sighed. Why couldn't you keep your mouth shut? He asked, and before Izuku could even stop him, he placed his hand on the man and he exploded in a large gore of blood. Izuku and Arie's eyes widened in terror as blood painted the alleyway from wall to wall. The man's hand hovered over the stain on the floor before he turned his attention back to Izuku and Arie, as he stood up to full height. Well, that was unpleasant. He spoke nonchalantly as he flexed his fingers. Now that the cat's been let out of the bag, how about we make a deal? Seeing as you managed to take out my boys, I'll make you a deal. Give me back Arie, and I promise to let you walk out of here with your life. He offered as Izuku glared. Why do you want Arie? Why is she so important to you? Izuku asked, still trembling slightly after watching a man be blown to pieces. That is none of your concern. All you need to know is that if you don't give her back to me, I can't promise you'll make it out of this alley alive. He said as Izuku held onto her tighter. Now, why don't you do the smart thing and hand her over? Not going to happen. Izuku countered as the man glared. Shame, Arie, if you don't come here right now, I will make sure there is nothing left of this boy to fit inside a Ziploc bag. You don't want to be responsible for another person's death, he said with accusation in his voice as Arie trembled and tears started to leak from her eyes. She looked to the dead thug's body, or what was left of it, as she looked back to Izuku as she feared the same result happening to him. The killer intent rolling off Kai made her know how serious he was. He was fully prepared to kill him, and he would remind her that it was her fault an innocent person was killed. She couldn't let that happen and knew she had no choice but to go back to him. But just as she was about to hop out of his arms, Izuku held onto her tighter and placed a comforting hand on the back of her head. She blinked in muted silence as he glared at Kai. She's not going with you. Izuku glared as the man blinked. Izuku swallowed his fear as he decided to take a page out of Kachan's book. I don't know who you think I am, but if you think I'm going to let Arie go with some child-abusing toucan-looking psychopath, then you've got another thing coming. So why don't take that glove, take your offer and shove it up to your ass, big bird, he roared as he channeled his inner Kachan. Because a hero never turns his back on someone in need, especially a crying child. Arie's eyes were wide as she felt something swell in her chest. A feeling she had never felt before. Hope. Kai growled as he removed his other glove and flexed his hands. So be it. Izuku's spider sense instantly went off as he leaned his body back, just as Kai's hand came rushing towards his face. So fast! Izuku exclaimed as he used his spider-enhanced leg strength to jump back from the man. Kai's hand slammed into the ground as it broke apart, suddenly reformed into sharp spikes, as they tried to piece the young man's body. The spikes grazed him as he did his best to avoid the spikes and keep Arie out of harm. He jumped up onto a wall, then off again, as it suddenly turned into spikes. He'd be Swiss cheese had he not jumped off a second earlier. Holy crap! That was close, Izuku yelled out as he did his best to avoid the spikes. Okay, let's think, find out how his quirk works. He touches something, it explodes, but then reshapes. He must have some sort of quirk that allows him to alter matter. But there has to be a limit or a weakness, he analyzed as he jumped from wall to wall, avoiding the deadly spikes. His spider sense went off as Kai came rushing towards him on a pillar of altered stone. Oh no, you don't. Izuku fired several shots of web as they flew at the man, causing him to avoid them and fall off the pillar, landing in the garbage. A fierce look crossed his face as Kai growled in annoyance. You little, he growled out as he sent more spikes at him. Izuku still dodged and avoided them while holding Arie tight to his chest. Okay, so his quirk also gives him control over the terrain and extra mobility. Damn, this guy is tough. I can't beat him in this kind of environment. And I can't risk using one for all when I barely have control over it. I could go invisible, but I can't cloak her as well, and there's no way I'm leaving her behind. But, he looked up to the sky as he shot a line of web. I don't need to fight him. I just need to get Arie out of here and into a public area. Then he'd have to deal with pro-heroes. He surmised as he pulled himself and Arie towards freedom. But suddenly large spikes shot out of the wall and closed the alley shut, severing the web line as Isuku and Arie began to fall towards more spikes. No! He yelled as he shot another web line and pulled himself and Arie away from danger and into a non-terraformed section of the alley. His body slammed into the concrete as it splintered on impact and caused him to cry out in pain. He did manage to spare Arie any pain by shielding her with his body. But the look of fear on her face was still evident. He grunted in pain as he slowly stood back up. Small cuts of blood stained his tracksuit and one of the lenses on his mask was cracked. But he refused to give up as he slowly stood back up and faced the man that was walking towards him. You have guts and great reflexes, I'll give you that, Kai said as he walked towards them and soon stood over them. But in the end, it's hopeless. You're no match for me, hero filth. So, give up Arie and I promise to make your death quick and painless. What do you say? He asked once more as Isuku looked to the small girl in his arms as she looked up to him with sadness and regret. But Isuku shook his head and then turned to the man. Well, when you put it like that, web to the face. He shot a glob of web as it impacted against the man's face. He yelled through muffled rage, as Isuku quickly shot more webs and bound his arm and legs to the walls. He delivered a powerful punch as the man was momentarily stunned by the action. His mysophobia acted up from contact as hives broke out over his face. His body flew across the alley before it slammed into the back wall. Isuku then fired 2 impact webs from his wrists and restrained the man. But Isuku knew that those wouldn't hold him. Come on, that's not going to hold. He yelled as he grabbed Arie, shot a web line, and pulled himself out of the alley. Just as Kai disassembled the webs and sent a myriad of spikes after the boy. One of the spikes managed to clip Izuku's outer leg as he screamed in pain. He and Arie tumbled on the roof as they groaned in pain. Izuku gasped in pain as he held his right leg that was bleeding from a nasty cut. Damn it! He groaned, but he refused to stay down as he limped up. Come on, he told Arie as he picked her up. We got to keep moving, he told her as he aimed his web shooters only for nothing to come out. Damn it! Must be out of fluid. He reached for his spares clips, only to find the pouch containing the spares on his utility belt was gone. More than likely ripped off in the fight. Crap. Got to do this the hard way, he told himself as he limped along the roof with the girl in his arms as tears streaked down her face. Don't worry, everything will be alright, I promise. He reassured her even as the small drops of blood leaked from the boy and guilt continued to build up in her chest. Please, stop, she wanted to tell him but couldn't say. Please stop, she silently cried as she was carried by her savior. I don't want you to die, not for me. Meanwhile, in the alley, Kai had become furious as he stood back up. Okay, I've just about had enough of this filthy spider freak. He growled as he created a stone pillar and jumped onto the roof. He marched along the roof, following a trail of blood as he tracked the boy that was starting to piss him off. Eventually, he found the boy, leaning on an air conditioning unit, as he held his ribs in pain, while his left hand kept Arie behind him. He almost chuckled at the sight. You know, in the 5 minutes I've known you, you have been a royal pain in my ass. Well, I am aiming to be a hero after all. So, if I tick you off, arg, then I'm doing something right. Izuku grunted as he held his ribs gingerly. TCH, are you kidding me? You're not even a real hero? You're just some kid that walked in on the place at the wrong time? Izuku shrugged his shoulders. That's my life story in a nutshell. But even so, I won't let you take her. He kept Arie behind her as Kai chuckled smugly. You think I'm not willing to hurt her? Look at her arms, the things I've done to her. I can pierce your bodies together and then put her back together like nothing, he told him as Izuku's glare hardened even further. And here I thought you couldn't get even more despicable, he retorted as Kai chuckled. No matter, this is the end for you, he said with a raised hand, but Izuku only chuckled as he shook his head. It doesn't matter what you do to me. So long as she gets out of here, I've done my job. He looked up as he smirked under his mask. Because that's what heroes do. He told him defiantly as Kai narrowed his eyes and prepared to end the boy's life. Isuku getting ready for anything as he prepared to sacrifice his life. BWHAHAHAHAHAHAHAHAHAHAHA. Suddenly they heard a familiar laugh as they looked to the sky. Everything will be all right. Why? A voice called out before a speeding object smashed into the rooftop. The dust was then blown away as all eyes widened and the man grinned. Because I am here. All Might. Izuku and Kai yelled out, one in awe and hope, while the other was in surprise and fear. The number one hero grinned as he showed a thumbs up to the boy. Are you all right, young man? Has this rapscallion been giving you trouble? All Might proclaimed, careful not to reveal his and Midoriya's connection. All Might. Thank God you're here. That man's been trying to kill me all because of this girl. He quickly told the pro hero as he pointed to the man. But be careful of his quirk. He can break down and reassemble anything he touches. I think he's been doing it to this little girl. He told the pro hero as he nodded. I thank you for the information, young man. But fear not. This wannabe criminal is no match for the likes of me. All Might proclaimed, but still was cautious of the man. I thank you for the information, young Midoriya, but as soon as this is done you and I are going to have a long chat, he thought to himself as he stood before the man. Now, I think it would be best if you surrender, villain. All Might asked, demanded the man who looked as though he was face to face with the devil himself. All Might. What the hell is All Might doing here? Kai cursed at the sight of the number one hero. Shit. There's no way I can take on the number one hero. Not without backup. But I can't let them take Arie from me. She's key to everything. Hell, I'm going to have to move the whole operation somewhere else to avoid All Might, he thought to himself. Damn it, no choice. I just need a distraction. He slammed his hand into the roof and sent long spikes towards him. And then take Arie back, he decided as the spikes rushed towards the hero. All Might. Izuku yelled out only for the hero to grin and pull his arm back and the wind circled his fist. Detroit, he began to yell and sent his fist flying. Smash! The shockwave was enough to shatter the stone spikes to pieces, as Kai was nearly sent flying away from the air pressure alone. Izuku and Arie had to shield themselves from the wind force as Izuku held her close. Eyes were wide as there was a large hole in the spikes, leading right back to Kai, who looked back in fear. Damn it! So, this is the power of the symbol of peace, he asked himself as the pro hero gave his trademark smirk. Now, All Might asked again, as he gripped his fist. How about that surrender? He asked as Kai cursed in anger and turned his glare to Izuku, the boy that had ruined everything. This is not over, spider freak. He yelled and slammed his hand into the roof, creating more spikes to distract All Might, who easily destroyed them with another Detroit smash, and made his escape. I will have Arie back. Mark my words, he swore as he disappeared into the night. Damn. All Might cursed as he rushed to the ledge, but he was long gone. He got away. He is a sneaky one. He sighed before he turned back to Izuku. Are you okay there, young Midoriya? He asked as Izuku nodded. Now that you're here. I wasn't sure you got my message. He pulled the phone from behind his back as it showed a text to All Might with a pin to his location. Well, I figured you're not the one to accidentally send a spam text without a reason. And it's a good thing I was on patrol, otherwise, you'd be dead. His grin turned into a frown as he glared at the boy. Now, Izuku stiffened at the glare he was receiving. Do you want to explain what exactly you were doing out here, and why you're wearing that mask? He looked behind the boy to the small girl behind him. And who is this? Asked as Izuku lowered his head. It's complicated, he started as the man crossed his arms. Let me guess, you wanted to test out your web shooters in an urban environment, didn't you? Then you stumbled on that guy harming this young girl and decided to step in, despite the fact you are not legally authorized to do so, he asked as Izuku said nothing. Damn it, Midoriya, I never expected this kind of behavior from you. I knew you were reckless, but to put your potential career on the line for a simple test. What were you think? He scolded as the boy hung his head. I don't know, I guess I wasn't thinking. He admitted as the pro hero sighed at his young protege. I can't say I'm not disappointed. What you did was reckless, foolish, and you could have gotten yourself killed. He chided the poor lad who hung his head, while Arie clutched to his pants leg slightly scared of the man. Sirens suddenly sounded as they both turned to see the familiar red and blue flash of the police. We'll discuss this later. For now, hand me your web shooters and mask. Can't have you being implicated in vigilantism. Just follow my lead and maybe we can salvage your future. He told the boy as he took the web shooters and mask from the lad and turned his back, making Isuku feel more ashamed than he did in his entire life. But, he said as Isuku looked up, I am proud of you. You followed your heart and did what you thought was right to save that girl. Another reason why I chose you. He told him as Isuku felt a little better, but don't think you're off the hook. You are going to be in so much trouble. Not just from me, but your mother as well. He started walking to the police who circled the area. Izuku smiled a little before dread came over him at the thought of his mother. Oh, crap. 1 hour later, Mustafa Hospital. Izuku sat in the spare medical room with Detective Sukachi, All Might and the police chief Kenji Suragame. A dog-headed man in a suit and black spotted tie, standing before him. They were going over the events of the last hour as Izuku explained, with All Might help, the events that transpired. Arie was in another room being looked over by Recovery Girl, which was difficult as she refused to let go of Izuku's hand. It only took for Izuku to promise her that he'd immediately be back after the interrogation that got her to calm down. As well as him giving her his mask and telling her it had special power to give her courage. Now, let's get this straight. You were walking home when you heard this girl, Arie, correct? Kenji asked as the boy nodded. Being threatened by some thugs. But instead of calling for help, you got yourself involved and attempted to take them on by yourself? He asked as Izuku nodded. Which is when All Might appeared and used a gadget he was testing to subdue the assailants. He went over the report as Izuku and All Might nodded. All Might had decided to claim that the web shooters were a gadget he was requested to test for a student. Not implausible as some students often had their gear tested by pro heroes. Which was confirmed by the principal, who was alerted earlier for the cover story. This would hopefully cover up Izuku's involvement with getting into a fight with thugs and using his quirk without authorization. But his injuries and initial reports of disturbance were hard to justify and could not be overlooked. This part of the report sounds irregular, but we can't verify it as your assailant had decided to take out his fellow criminals, for what reason we don't know. The chief said as when they went to arrest the thugs, they were already dead with concrete spikes piercing their torsos. So, I'm going to take All Might's word for it and believe him, the chief said before he laced his fingers. But you do understand, Mr. Midoriya, that what you did was illegal, correct? He asked. We can't have civilians using their quirk without proper authorization from the Hero Licensing Commission. If it wasn't for the fact that All Might praised your actions in helping this young child, you'd be facing a hefty sum of illegal fines and community service, he told the boy as he nodded. Still, I won't deny that what you did wasn't valiant and commemorate you for your good deed. So, we're going to let you off with a warning this time. But I never want to hear about you acting like a vigilante again, understand? Izuku nodded as the chief stood up. I'll leave the rest of the investigation to you, Sukachi. I need some coffee, the chief said as Sukachi nodded and left the room. All of them in relief. Not even a hero yet, and already you're causing problems with the police. You found a strange one, hey All Might? All Might nodded as he exploded in a cloud of steam and returned to his true form. Tell me about it, the kid's got guts, but I swear he's going to put me in an early grave. He joked as Izuku hung his head. As I said, I'm disappointed about how we got here, but not for what you did to save that young girl. Even if it was extremely reckless, he said as Izuku nodded. I know, and I promise you it won't happen again, but I just couldn't leave her behind. You understand, right? He asked as the pro hero nodded. I understand, which makes me proud of you, my boy, and reaffirms my decision in choosing you, young man. All Might said as the boy smiled slightly until All Might grabbed his ear and twisted. But don't think you'll get out of this unpunished. Next time you won't have a small child as an excuse for reckless actions. Ow, 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 okay. I'm sorry, I promise. Just please stop twisting my ear. I need that, he cried out as Sukachi chuckled. Speaking of which, we should get back to her. You made a promise after all, he said as Izuku nodded and all three of them left the room to the infirmary. Midoriya hobbled a little on his leg. You going to be all right on that leg? He asked as the boy's thigh was wrapped in bandages. Yeah, The doctor said it wasn't too bad and my healing factor should have it fixed by the morning, Isuku said, even as he limped along with the others. Still, why were they so keen on obtaining this child? Isuku asked as they walked towards Arie's room. What made her so special? He asked as All Might thought for a moment. It's possible she possesses a unique quirk. There have been reported situations of children disappearing because they display unique and powerful quirks at a young age. Some would do anything to obtain these children and use them for their nefarious means. And judging from the scarring on her arms and legs, she may have been part of experimentation. All Might explained, having been aware of such illegal activates. He looked around to make sure no one was listening in. The spider? He whispered as the man shrugged. Possible, but she didn't display any of your abilities, so I doubt it was the same experiment, he said, but was no less disputing the theory. However, the man you faced didn't seem like a typical villain or thug. All Might noted as they neared the infirmary. He was adamant on getting young Arie back, no matter the cost. If that's the case, then what is her significance to him? Isuku asked as all of them pondered. Who knows? But the important thing is that he didn't get a good look at you, and you refrained from saying your name. So, he won't know who you are. But just in case, keep an eye out from strange activates. All Might said as Isuku nodded. From your description, I feel like I've heard about him from somewhere, and you're sure his name was Kai? Sukachi asked as Isuku nodded. I'll ask around the hero agencies in the area. I'm sure one of them is running an investigation that could help us ID him, Sukachi said as they opened the door. Arie sat on the medical bed, Izuku's mask held tightly in her hand, as Recovery Girl jotted down on a notepad. She was called in to look over the child as she was the most useful dealing with children and had the most expert on handling situations like this. As soon as the door opened and Arie spotted Izuku, she hopped down from the bed and latched herself into his waist. Whoa! Izuku stumbled as she held on tight. It's okay, I told you I'd be back. He reassured her as she nodded. The mask he gave her was still in her hand as she held it close. And see, I told you the mask had special powers. You were so brave while I was gone, he said as she nodded softly. So, Recovery Girl, what the prognosis? All Might asked. Recovery Girl sighed with a tired voice. In all the years I've dealt with child abuse victims, I still cannot fathom the cruelty that human beings can inflict on a small child. Especially one as innocent as her. She told the man as she set her clipboard down. Physically she's fine, but the scars on her arms and legs are not random, they're surgical, almost as if whoever was holding her was extracting something from her body. The number of them is disturbing. My God, All Might said as he clenched his fist. What kind of monster would hurt such an innocent child? He asked, wanting to take another swing at the man he met. Izuku himself wished he had used his full strength and bust the man's head open. That's not the only thing I found disturbing. She was also too calm when I injected her with the needle to take a blood sample, almost as if she was used to it. And when we ran her blood through the database, no matches came up. And I don't just mean her identity, but nothing on her parents or close relatives. It's almost as if she doesn't exist, she said as All Might and Sukachi blinked. How is that possible? Sukachi asked. Almost everyone nowadays is cataloged in the database. Heck, it should have at least told us who her parents are. He questioned as she shook her head. I believe given her circumstances she may have been from less than the legal background. It's not unheard of for cases like this, but hard to erase that kind of data. Whoever she belonged to was either in on it, was paid off, or was silenced, she suggested as they all looked solemn at this. So, what will happen now? Izuku asked as he looked down at the quiet girl. In normal cases like this, missing children will be handed over to the foster care system, either until her real parents turn up, or she's placed in a foster family, Sukachi said before Recovery Girl shook her head. I don't think that will be the best choice, she said as they turned to her. What do you mean? All Might asked as she gestured to Arie clinging to Izuku. Right now, I'm more concerned about her psychological health. It is unnatural for a child her age to be this emotionless. She rarely showed any emotion, until Midoriya walked into the room. Recovery Girl said as she listed her prognosis of the child. I believe if we put her into the foster care system, she would continue to stagnate emotionally. But, if we were to place her in Midoriya's care, then we may see an improvement in her stability. You want young Midoriya to adopt a child? He's too young for that and he has the exam to concentrate on, All Might said as Isuku nodded. Why yeah. I don't the first thing about raising kids, heck, I'm still a kid myself, he exclaimed as she sighed, shaking her head. I didn't mean for him to adopt her, but rather she'd be adopted into his family to live with him. She needs to be around someone she trusts and be in a nurturing environment. Midoriya is the only one she trusts right now, anyone else, and it would be detrimental to her recovery. She needs to recover slowly, and seeing how closely attached she is to you now, prying her away wouldn't be healthy, and it would be easier to know she will be in a good home. She told him as he looked at her. But if I take her in, I'll have to explain everything to my mom. What happened, how we got here, which means, he trailed off as All Might sighed. Which means I will have to tell her my secret, All Might said as Izuku hung his head. I'm sorry All Might, I didn't mean for this to happen, he apologized as the man shook his head. I know young Midoriya. Your heart was in the right place, some things are just out of our control. He told the young man, but I hope you realize that there are consequences to your actions and keep it in mind the next time you do something reckless. He told him as Izuku nodded. I will. I can't promise it won't be reckless, but I'll keep it in mind, he told his mentor who sighed. I guess that's the best I can hope for, he said as Recovery Girl nodded. Well, now that that has been settled, we should contact Mrs. Midoriya and organize this. We will have to create a new identity for her, in case those men are after her, she said as Sukachi nodded. I can organize the paperwork, but we should wait for his mother before we do anything, he said as Recovery Girl. And what about your father, would he be okay with this? She asked as Izuku shrugged. Don't know, I haven't seen or heard from him in years. Mum said he was doing work overseas, but I think he just walked out on us, so, I don't think it'd be a problem, Izuku told her as she nodded. I see, and your mother, do you think she'd be okay raising another child? She asked as Izuku was about to open his mouth when the door slammed open and a green-haired woman, with waterfall-like tears, burst into the room. All Might gagged on the blood rocketing out his mouth as the sudden entrance caused him to nearly have a heart attack. While Arie hid behind All Might's leg, startled at the crying woman. Izuku! Inko yelled as she rushed over to his son. Mum! He managed to yell before she grabbed hold of him and held him tight. Oh, my baby! I was so scared when the police called me, are you alright? Did you get hurt? Oh, my sweet baby boy! She cried as she held his face and looked over his bandages. Oh, my baby, what did they do to you? She cried as she nearly soaked everyone in the room with her tears. Well, now we know where he gets the crying from, All Might deadpanned. Mrs. Midoriya, Sukachi said as he managed to draw her attention. I can assure you your son is fine. He was just involved in a little incident, but he's otherwise fine, he said as she calmed down. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. When I got the call, I got so worried, she said before turning to Izuku. What were you doing out there, Izuku, so late? How did you get into a fight? And she trailed off when she noticed the small girl at his side. And, who is this? She asked as Izuku swallowed his fear and stood before her. Mum, there's something we need to talk about, he said as he rubbed the back of his head. See, I kind of was testing out my new web shooters in the city. What? Izuku, why would you do something like that? Don't you know how illegal it? I know, but things kind of got out of hand and I found Arie here, being attacked by thugs. He explained as he gestured to the girl who was hiding behind his leg. I fought them because I didn't want her to get hurt. Then it escalated and, now we kind of need to adopt her, he said quickly as the woman stared before blinking. What? She asked as Izuku sighed. See, the people that had her, they were doing bad stuff to her. I saved her and now she's kind of attached to me. See, the thing is, he trailed off, finding it hard to explain. What your son is trying to explain is that due to certain circumstances, this young child must be placed in your care. Recovery Girl said as she turned to her. This young child, Arie, was the subject of terrible abuse and needs a foster family. Your son has made an impression on her and it's my medical expertise that she'd be adopted into your family. And you are? Inko asked. Recovery Girl, I'm the one that did the examination on your son and confirmed he had a quirk, she said before continuing. Mrs. Midoriya, we realize that this is a difficult situation, and we fully understand if you reject this. But the case is your son is important to this girl. Had he not saved her, there is no telling what harm she may have continued to suffer. She explained as Inko looked between her, Isuku, and Arie. Mum, Izuku said as she turned to him. I know there's a lot I need to explain. There have been things I've hidden from you and I need to tell you things. Some stuff won't make sense, but, he looked down to Arie and placed a comforting hand on her head. Arie needs us, and I can't just abandon her. Not after everything she's been through. I'll do whatever I can to help, but please, she needs us. Because to her, I'm her hero. Inko looked at the sheer determination in her son's face and voice, as she recalled years ago when he asked her if he could be a hero. At the time she didn't support him and apologized for a hand that life had dealt him, and she had regretted it ever since. But now he was, standing before her and asking her for something that seemed completely outrageous. She wasn't fully sure how she should respond. But when she looked at the small girl clinging to him like a lifeline. How on earth could any mother say no? She sighed before nodding. Okay, she said as Izuku brightened up. We'll adopt her, but starting from now you're going to tell me everything. No more secrets, and no more late-night experiments. Okay? She asked as he nodded. Okay, he said as she smiled. Good, besides, it'll be nice to have a daughter. She's certainly cute, she said as Arie peeked around his leg to look at her. Hello, I'm Inko, Izuku's mother. She said as she stretched her hand to her. It's very nice to meet you. She said as the girl looked at her and slowly took her hand, feeling the familiar warmth she felt with Izuku. Hello, she said as Inko smiled and brought the small girl into a hug, that startled Arie, but caused her to relax as she had never been held before like this. But it also felt familiar, as she barely remembered her mother and had vague memories of her. But still this feeling. It was nice. The others smiled as they were glad that Inko was warming up to the child, which would make things a whole lot easier. Now, Inko said as she looked to her son. Is there anything else I should know about? She asked as Izuku stiffened and started scratching the back of his head. Well, the thing is, for the past 4 months I've kind of been training with. I think I'll explain it, young Midoriya, Yagi said as Inko turned to him. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't notice you there. Who are you? She asked, as Toshinori grinned and steam started to roll his body before he exploded in a cloud of steam, and in his place stood the #1 hero in Japan, All Might. I am. The man exclaimed as Inko's eyes went wide. All Might. She screamed in shock as the man laughed his signature laugh. That's right, Mrs. Midoriya. You see, for the past 4 months I have been training your son in secret. Helping him to master his new quirk, and I asked him not to reveal my secret. He flexed his arms in his automatic showboating nature. I know that this is a lot for you to take in, Mrs. Midoriya, and more Midoriya, and I must explain to you. But know that the reason I am training him is because I believe he is worthy to be my successor as the next symbol of peace. He explained as Inko stared with wide eyes. Mrs. Midoriya. Mum? Izuku asked before his mother's eyes rolled into the back of his head and she fainted. Mum. Oh my god, you killed my mum. What? I didn't kill her. She just fainted. All Might stammered as both mentor and apprentice started arguing amongst themselves, while Arie tried to wake her up. The woman lying on the floor with foam coming out of her mouth and her eyes rolled into the back of her head. Recovery Girl sighed as she shook her head. Idiot, she said before deciding to go and get a cup of coffee. Izuku's Room Spider Experiment, Untitled, Day 132. Izuku started onto the camera as he shrugged his shoulders. So, yeah, I had to explain everything to Mum. She was a little shaken up. But, after All Might explained everything about my new quirk, she started to understand. She didn't like the idea of not being told about the spider. But she understood. He said as avoiding telling the camera about One for All before he sighed. So, now for breaking the rules and nearly getting into trouble with the law. All Might and my mum decided that I needed to be punished. So, I'm grounded for the next month. No hero training, no spider experiments, no more All Might merchandise. Nothing, which honestly is the best I could have hoped for, he said as he shrugged his shoulders. Besides, I need this time to help Arie here get adjusted to living with us, he said as he stroked her hair and gave her a comforting smile. As of today, she is officially Arie Midoriya. My surrogate little sister and newest member of the family. He looked down at her as he smiled. I did something stupid, crazy, and nearly cost me my potential career as a hero, but honestly, If almost losing my hero career meant saving Ares from a terrible life, he looked back to the camera and smiled. Then I'd do it again in a heartbeat. After all, he smiled as he shrugged his shoulders. That's what heroes do. He smiled before he turned off the camera and the screen went dark. It had been roughly a week since Isuku rescued Arie from the man known as Kaichisaki. They learned his name thanks to an ongoing investigation run by All Might's former sidekick, Sir Night-Eye. While annoyed that Midoriya stumbled onto the case, he was grateful that now they had a valid excuse and a warrant for his arrest. Child abduction and abuse were good cause to arrest. But by the time they raided the hideout, Kaichisaki and his top lieutenants were long gone, leaving only a skeleton crew to distract them. They had found evidence that Kaichisaki and his 8 precepts of death were partly responsible for the distribution of a new quirk-enhancing drug called Trigger. A drug designed to enhance the user's quirk factor beyond what was previously thought to be the extent. In the wrong hands, the drug could turn low-level criminals into dangerous threats. But now with the 8 precepts on the run, the distribution of the drug began to limit. While disappointing that Chisaki wasn't captured, it did ease the fact that because Kai and his gang were on the run, they wouldn't be after Arie anytime soon. Which put Izuku at ease, but he still kept his eye out. As for Arie, it was a bit of a struggle for her to adjust to a life outside of Kai's cruelty. From what they understood, the conditions of her home were bleak and depressing to say the less. The room she was kept in was small, dark and barely had any sort of child entertainment. It was almost as if she was just a product for them, to be used and harvested. To what end they still didn't know, as Kai had destroyed the servers and computers with his quirk, making it impossible to learn what his end goal was. So, for the time being, Izuku and Inko did their best to ease Arie into normal life. Although she refused to leave Izuku's side, so she had to stay in his room. At first, Izuku was willing to let her sleep in his bed, while he had a roll-out bed until a more permanent solution could be found. But in the morning, he would wake up with the small girl clutching his side. The sight alone made Izuku's heart squeeze. But aside from the curtness of it, it was obvious to both of them that the young girl was traumatized by what she went through, and suddenly being in a non-hostile environment would take some getting used to. So, she would seek out Izuku as an anchor, to help herself deal with the situation. Whatever Kai had done to her, had stripped her of nearly all of her emotions other than fear and guilt. Especially when they found that due to her circumstance, she never had a proper childhood or even learned how to smile. Something that had enraged All Might and Izuku. But they were all more than willing to help her overcome her fears and ease her into normality. Inko wanted to give her a good home and show her the affection she had been denied for so long. Part of it was she felt she had a second chance to do right where she had failed with her son long ago. Not that he blamed her. And Izuku's goal was to erase the darkness that had a hold on her heart. It's a good thing Mum got the school to agree to take some time off to help Arie, otherwise, it'd be harder to help her adjust if I was at school all day, he said to himself as he looked over from his desk to the small child resting in his bed. After what she's been through, she's going to need all the help we can give, he thought before he sighed mentally. The only downside of this is that my training is on hold because I'm grounded. He thought as he closed his eyes and remembered the long and angry chat he had with his mother and All Might. I know what I did was wrong and illegal, but if I hadn't done it, what would have happened to Arie? Would she have been saved eventually or never? And if I didn't act, who knows what could have happened? He suddenly felt a tug on his shirt as Arie had reached out in her sleep and grabbed his shirt. He smiled softly as he patted her head affectionately, effectively calming her down. Still, it was totally worth it in the end, he thought as pulled the blanket more over her body and leaned back in his chair, a small chuckle exiting his throat. I still can't believe that one night in town and suddenly I have a little sister, albeit not in a conventional way. I'm a big brother now. A pregnant pause filled the room before his eyes snapped open in realization. Oh crap, I'm a big brother, he sat up as he mulled the words over in his head. I'm a big brother, how the heck do you be a big brother? He snapped over to his computer as he started frantically typing and searching the web. Let's see, big brother, how to be a big brother. 3 ways to be the best big brother, nope. How not to mess them up, that doesn't help at all. Audiobooks, YouTube videos, an article. Damn it, none of this help. He listed all the searches on his computer. He paused when he heard a soft groan and Arie sat up, as she held the edges of his blanket, Isuku? She asked as he turned to her. Why yeah, Arie? He asked as she looked down nervously. Can I have a glass of water? She asked as he blinked at the uneasiness of her request, until he remembered about Kai and nodded. Sure thing, he said with a small smile as she hopped off the bed and grabbed his hand, then followed him into the kitchen. After giving her a glass of water, and an apple when her stomach growled, Izuku took her back to his room where he tucked her into the All Might blanket. There, feel better? He asked as she nodded. Yes, sorry I disturbed you, she said as he shook his head. There's nothing you need to apologize for. If you ever need something, don't hesitate to ask, okay? After all, he took a moment to say the words as he patted her head. Your big brother, he told her as she seemed conflicted about asking for stuff before she nodded and drifted off into sleep. Good night, Arie, good night, Izuku, she said as she closed her eyes and fell asleep. He looked at her sleeping form before he smiled and brushed a hand through her hair. Huh, I guess being a big brother won't be so hard after all. He told himself as he promised himself he would always take care of her. But I better buy one of those books. The next morning, Mustutafa shopping district. Remind me again, Izuku asked as Arie wearing a green beanie to hide her horn, his mother, and All Might in his true form, were walking around the Mustutafa shopping district. Why are we here? He asked looking around at the many citizens and people walking around and shopping. Well, even though Arie looks cute in your old clothes, I think it's important that we get her more age-appropriate and suitable clothes. I know you're a fan of All Might, Izuku. But she can't be wearing the same t-shirts for the rest of her life. Inko explained as she walked alongside her son. Arie held onto his hand for dear life, as she looked around in both awe and trepidation at the shopping district. Okay, I get that. But why is All? He was cut off as All Might slapped a hand over his face. Not out loud, kid. All Might hissed. Call me by true name, Toshinori Yagi, he told him as Izuku nodded. Smorf Alf MIHP sorry All Might, he spoke through the hand before it was removed. Okay, why is Mr. Yagi here? That felt wrong to say. He muttered to himself as All Might shook his head and gestured for Inko to take Arie further along. Inko nodded as she took hold of Arie's hand to lead her away. Arie stared with concern before Izuku nodded to her and let her know it was okay. The two men then huddled closer to exchange a private conversation. Even though Chisaki's operations have been dismantled, that villain remains at large. At any moment he could try and retake Arie back by force. So far Arie has a new identity in the database, but we don't know how far-reaching his contacts could be. So, for the time being, I'll be accompanying you and your family. He whispered to him in a hushed tone as they walked behind Arie and Inko, making sure no one was around to eavesdrop. But what about your hero duties? He asked as All Might waved him off. Relax, there are plenty of heroes at the moment, and I only really intervene when the situation is dire. Plus, I doubt they'd try anything brazen in daylight, with so many heroes on patrols, so she should be safe. So long as we keep an eye out. And Sir Night Eye's searching for him, All Might told him as Izuku nodded. Izuku nodded as he remembered the documents that showed Arie, as Arie Midoriya, the second child of the Midoriya residents. The only reason she didn't dye her hair a different color was it was not recommended or safe for children to dye their hair until puberty. Besides, they knew that Kai would come after her eventually. No matter what they did to hide her identity, fake name or not, he was coming for her. So, they may as well draw him to them. It was only a matter of time. Luckily, after the raid on their compound, and the investigation into their funds and offshore accounts, the 8 precepts of death lacked the resources necessary to find her. They would find it especially hard to find her, seeing as the Yakuza had lost a lot of their influences since quirks and heroes showed up. So, there would be less chance of a mole in the police force, and the only one that had access to her file was All Might's friend, Detective Naomasa Tsukachi, and All Might himself since he had alpha-level security and authority over the young girl's personal information. He was the #1 hero after all, who was going to say no to him? Plus, the Midoriyas were being moved to a new location closer to UA Academy, come the exam in 6 months. So, for now, Arie was safe and secure. I hope so, Izuku said as he was still worried about Kai coming after his little sister. I understand your worry, young Midoriya, but we can't focus solely on the future, merely on the now. And right now, That young girl needs proper clothing, food, and all the other necessities a young child needs for a healthy childhood. All Might told the young man. I guess you're right. By the way, how was it meeting your old sidekick? I heard that you had a falling out with him some time ago. Was it bad? Isuku asked as All Might thought back to a week ago. 1 week ago, Sir Night Eye Hero Agency All Might regular form, stood across from the man he once considered his sidekick. A tall, lean but muscular man with rather sharp and elongated features. His shiny hair was always worn smoothed down and parted to his left, and was dark green, with 3 yellow streaks towards the front, 2 on his right, and 1 on his left. His eyebrows were also yellowish, matching the rims of the triangular glasses he wore and the strikingly bright yellow irises of his stern-looking eyes. His look gave off a sense of authority and power, as he rarely smiled and looked stern, and he appeared to be glaring. I have to admit, All Might, I never thought our reunion would be like this, Night Eye said as he read over the file of Arie, Midoriya. Who would have thought it would take a little girl to force us to meet each other again? Life has a strange sense of humor, I'll admit, All Might said as he stood across from him. It has been too long since we've had a chat. I kind of wish it wasn't about work as well, but that's the life of a hero. We can't change that, Night Eye said as he looked at his former partner, staring at the thin body. You've lost a lot of weight, he said as All Might shrugged his shoulders. That's what happens when your stomach is basically crushed. On the plus side, I can fit into that swimsuit in time for summer. He joked as he got a small smirk from his ex-partner. Huh, knew that would get you. You always did like jokes. That aside, let's get down to business, Night Eye said as he set the folder down, a folder that had Kai Chisaki's picture. I've been investigating this man and his group for years, searching for any solid evidence I could find, he informed All Might as the man sat down. I had reason to believe he was part of the distribution of the new trigger drug that's been hitting the streets. I heard about that. Wasn't it related to the instant villain incident? All Might asked as he remembered the incident where an individual was either forced or took the quirk-enhancing drug trigger. The incident was orchestrated by a quirk user that could use bees that explode to spread chaos. The user nearly used bees to destroy a section of the city, had it not been for All Might destroying the mini-bombers with his Nebraska smash. Yes, I heard that situation was ultimately resolved thanks to pro-heroes and vigilantes, correct? He asked as All Might shrugged. Wouldn't know about that part. All I did was stop some insects from blowing up the city, he said as Night Eye shook his head. Humble to the end, Night Eye said, with a small hidden smirk before it returned to his frown. In any case, I had suspicions that Kai Chisaki, a former Yakuza enforcer, would be behind some of the trigger distributions. It seemed the most logical choice. But I couldn't find anything solid on him for a while. But you were determined to wait, All Might said as he nodded. I was, until I got a call this morning from your detective friend, who informed me about a teenager that got into a fight with a man matching his descriptions. Who, without a license, fought the man and saved a small girl connected with the prime suspect. He said as he held up the police report. Thanks to that, I got permission from the judges to conduct a raid on the base. Kidnapping and experimenting on a child were enough to issue a warrant for his arrest. We'll begin the raid shortly. But that's not why you're here, is it? He asked as All Might nodded. I wish to take part in the raid as well. Seeing as I was involved in the incident with young Arie, I would like to make sure her abuser is put behind bars, All Might explained as Night Eye adjusted his glasses. I understand your motivation and would welcome you to the task force. But I need to discuss something with you first, about Isuku Midoriya. He looked to All Might as the #1 hero flinched slightly. The incident report regarding his involvement states that he just happened to be in the area and got the girl away from Shisaki and his men. That's when you arrived, took out the thugs and saved the girl. His glasses reflected off the light as he stared at All Might. But looking at the evidence, I know that his associates were detained before you arrived, held down by an unknown support item that you claimed was a student's invention from UA that you were testing. He set the folder down as he glared. However, you and I both know you aren't one to use support items, especially not ones that use artificial webs, meaning this boy, Isuku Midoriya, constructed said device and acted without consent, effectively breaking the law. He said as All Might clenched his jaw. But not only that, I suspect he knows about your true identity and that of One for All, doesn't he? He asked as his former partner remained silent. I see, and you're going to choose him as your successor. I already have, he admitted as Sir Night Eye remained silent and breathed out a sigh. All Might, of all the reckless things you could do, this is by far the most reckless thing you have ever done. He said with a calm but angered tone. You gave One for All to a child, that as far as I can understand, is supposed to be quirkless. He asked as he showed Izuku's personal file, with his quirk status marked as quirkless. There's a long story about that, and we may need to change that file soon. But I can assure you that young Midoriya will not do it again until he has his license. All Might said before Night Eye slammed his hand to the table. That's not the point. You gave One for All, the quirk that has been passed down for 200 years, to a mere child that decides to disregard the law and get into a fight with a dangerous criminal. He shouted as he stood up. Midoriya didn't mean to do that. Yes, he did get into a fight, but it was for a good cause. If it wasn't for him, you'd still be searching for evidence on Chisaki for months. Maybe even a year. But now that you have the evidence you need, you can arrest him and put him behind bars. That doesn't change the fact he abused the law, took matters into his own hands and nearly got himself killed. He was completely reckless and stupid. What would have happened if he died with One for All? Night Eye shouted as he glared at his All Might glared back. I'm not sure, but he didn't. Young Midoriya is more capable than you realize. And while what he did was reckless and irresponsible, he has a good heart and a strong will. I deem him worthy as my successor. You may, but I think he's a menace, Night Eye said before he sighed and hung his head. I won't deny what he did wasn't valiant, hell, it even advanced my investigation. But I just feel that he's not the one that should carry on your legacy. You are the symbol of peace, All Might. You have protected Japan and kept criminals at bay for the longest time. You've inspired so many heroes to follow in your footsteps, like me, and I've supported you for so long, even to this day. He hung his head. And I still remember the day we end our partnership when you fought him 5 years ago. I begged you to retire and find someone worthy to inherit your quirk because I didn't want to witness the future I saw. But you know I couldn't do that. All Might remembered that day as well. A grim day that ended his master's killer but limited his time as a hero. The world needed me, in case another villain like him would take his place. And I will always answer her call. I know, despite our parting, I know. Even so, I just want to make sure that this child won't destroy everything you created. I don't want my hero to fade away, he admitted as silence hung over the room. All Might sighed as he hung his head. Sasaki, I know that you look up to me, heck young Midoriya is just as much a fan as you are. But both of you have to realize, I'm not going to be around forever. One day my time will come, and I will gladly face it. Whether it be fighting a powerful foe, or because of my health. But before then, I will train young Midoriya to face the challenges and master One for All. Because I believe he will become a great hero one day, one that will eclipse even me. And I hope that you will help. He asked as Night Eye sighed and sat down. Our first conversation in years, and the first thing we do is argue about One for All again. He asked as he took off his glasses and massaged the bridge of his nose. It's almost like nothing's changed, hasn't it? Yeah, All Might agreed as Night Eye sighed and put his glasses back on. Okay, if he makes it into UA and makes it to the internship, I may consider interning him. As for the raid, we would be more than happy to have you on board. I'll have Centipede send you the details, he said as All Might nodded. Thank you, Sasaki, he said as he turned to leave. By the way, he looked back with a smile. It was good seeing you again, we should catch up more. He said as Night Eye stared before a small smile spread on his face. I'd like that, he said as All Might left, feeling that the bond he thought was broken, remained firm to this day. Present day, honestly, I think it was long overdue, and probably for the best. I've pushed a lot of people away in my life. But maybe it's time I started reconnecting again, he told the young man as he nodded. But right now, let's focus on what young Arie needs. And don't worry about the cost, I'm covering it, he told Izuku as the young protege blinked. Are you sure I mean Mr. Yagi? He asked, still not used to call him by his civilian name. Don't you need that for food and stuff? He asked his mentor as the man chuckled. Relax, kid. With the money I make from my job, as well as the endorsements and merchandise, I can stand to lose a few spare yen. Besides, I don't spend much on myself anyway. I never was much for the fancy lifestyle, and as for food, since I lost my stomach, my small intestine had to pick up the slack, which limits how much I can eat, so don't worry about that. He told the boy, his hand reaching for the scar on his ribs. Besides, I'm also responsible for that young girl too, seeing as she is now your sister. He told the young man, who looked back to Arie as she walked nervously alongside Inko, her small hand holding tightly to his mother's. If it means she grows up safe and sound, then it's worth it. Yeah, it is, Isuku said as he smiled softly. Now, we should hurry along. Poor girl looks nervous enough as it is, he said as Isuku nodded. After a while later, the four of them managed to get everything the newest member of the Midoriya family needed. Now, instead of an All Might t-shirt and shorts from Izuku's childhood wardrobe, the young girl was dressed in a white dress shirt with a frilled collar and a plain red pinafore with two large, golden buttons on either side of her chest. Under this, she wore gray tights and a large set of tan boots with a small dark red messenger bag with the strap sitting over her right shoulder and a little floral pattern decorating one of its sides. She also had the beanie replaced with a yellow sun hat with a small green flower on the band. Her hair also looked to be better cared for, appearing straighter and neater than it was during her time with the Shihasaikai. Oh, you look so cute, Inko said as Arie fidgeted with her strap. Why you think so? She asked with a small unsure voice, not used to wearing anything other than a filthy smock dress and bandages. Inko and Izuku nodded as she pulled the hat down on her head but felt a warm feeling in her chest. Thank you, I'm sorry if it cost too much, she said as Izuku smiled and patted the top of her head. It's okay, Arie, you don't have to worry about stuff like that. We just want you to be happy, okay? He asked as she stared with small confusion, but with a strange feeling of warmth. Was this what kindness felt like? Now, let's see what we can do about. Inko trailed off as they left the store and searched for anything else that Arie needed. Inko, is that you? She suddenly heard as both Izuku and Inko turned to see a spiky ash blonde-haired woman. Alongside her was a spiky brown-haired man with glasses and someone that made Izuku momentarily flinch and fluctuate invisible for a brief second. Which luckily no one noticed. Katsuki Bakugo. Mitsuki. Inko stuttered for a moment before the slim ash blonde woman hugged the shorter plump woman. Inko, it's been too long. I haven't seen you in over a month. Mitsuki Bakugo, Katsuki's mother, said as she smiled at the woman. Katsuki scoffed as he turned his head away. Oi, brat, say hello to your elders, you disrespectful twerp. Mitsuki yelled as he growled. Just great, the last thing I wanted was to go out shopping with the hag. Now I run into Deku of all places, just great, he growled under his breath before he turned to Inko. Hello, Inko Oba, it's good to see you. He bowed slightly, to which the shorter woman smiled nervously. Oh, hello Katsuki, it's good to see you too, she said, still somewhat nervous and unsure of the boy that was both Izuku's former childhood friend, his bully, and the son of her high school friend. Katsuki just looked at Izuku before glaring and growling Deku under his breath. Oh, don't mind him. He's still upset that he got captured by the slime villain a few months back. Oi, brat, thank Izuku for saving your life already. Shut up. Deku didn't do jack against that slime bastard. It was All Might that beat him up. Deku just got in my way. He yelled only to be slapped upside the head as he ground his teeth in anger. Sorry Izuku, but I do want to thank you. Even though he won't say it, I'm grateful you did what you did. Mitsuki said as she bowed to him. Thank you, for saving my son, she said as Izuku blushed as he hid behind his arms. Oh well, it wasn't much really. And Kachan's kind of right, I did just get in the way. He said as she shook her head. Nonsense, as far as I'm concerned, you're a hero, she said as Izuku felt a wave of joy in his chest. All Might behind him smiling at the knowledge that Izuku would become a great hero someday. Even if it was just being thanked by one mother. So, Inko-chan, what have you been up to? We haven't seen each other in a while. Anything new and exciting happen? She asked. Oh, well, Inko stuttered. She had been like this ever since she and Mitsuki met at high school years ago. You could say a lot has happened. She gestured to her leg, as Arie hid behind her new mother. Katsuki blinked while Mitsuki had sparkles in her eyes, literally. Oh, my gosh, she slowly said as she reached for the girl. She is so cute, she said while hugging the startled girl and rubbing her cheek against hers. Aren't you just the cutest thing in the world? Inko, who is this angel child? She asked as Arie managed to escape her grip and ran behind Isuku. Oh, sorry Mitsuki, she gets startled easily when she meets new people. She apologized to her friend. Her name is Arie, and as of late she's our adopted child. She told her as Mitsuki blinked. Adopted? Seriously? No offense, but I thought you and Hisashi wouldn't be up for that kind of thing, especially seeing as he doesn't even bother to call or visit you anymore. Mitsuki said as she clenched her fist angrily, still annoyed that Izuku's father and Inko's husband took extended work overseas and never bothered to check in on his wife. It's quite alright Mitsuki. Inko managed to say to calm her friend. Hisashi won't mind, and the circumstance involving Arie-chan are unique, she said as the small girl looked around from behind Izuku's leg. It's a long story, but basically she's in our care because Izuku found her and she's formed a strong attachment to him. She explained as Mitsuki felt her heart clench at the sight of Arie clinging to Izuku. Oh, that is so precious. Knowing Izuku, that definitely sounds like something he would do. She then snapped over and smacked her son upside the head. Damn it, why can't you be more like Izuku and adopt a kid off the streets? Shut up you old hag. Bakugo barked back. What did you call me you little runt? She barked back as they growled at each other. And now you two, please don't fight. We're in public after all. Masaru Mitsuki's husband and Katsuki's father said as he tried to calm down his son and wife. Are they always like this? All Might asked as he pointed at the family, to which Inko and Izuku just chuckled nervously. Yeah, they said as they had somewhat grown used to the strange family that was the Bakugos. Oh, by the way, who is this? Mitsuki asked pointing to All Might, as she held her son by the ear and stopped him from ranting. He's been standing around for a while, is he with you? She asked as the three flinched slightly. Oh, my name is Yagi, Toshinori Yagi, I'm Midoriya's personal trainer. He explained as Katsuki stopped fidgeting and turned to the skinny man. Huh, what the hell are you talking about? What the heck does a worthless person like Deku need a trainer for? And you don't look like you could train anyone at all. Bakugo said before his mother slapped him upside the head. Oi, don't be rude you little bugger. She scolded as the boy ground his teeth. I'm sorry about my son's disrespectful behavior. She apologized as All Might chuckled, not his usual laugh. It's quite alright, I get that a lot. I used to help train pro heroes back in the day. But I suffered an accident years ago. So, now I instruct younger generations to become heroes. He explained, having come up with a reasonable excuse if anyone ever saw him train Midoriya. Oh, well that's good. So, I'm guessing Inko hired you to train Izuku? She asked as Inko nodded, knowing all about All Might's secret after adopting Arie. Well, I wish you luck Izuku, it's going to be especially challenging going into the exam without a quirk. Izuku nodded, not wanting to reveal he had a quirk in front of Kacchan, lest the boy got angry at him. Like he always did, he was about to agree with her, when suddenly his spider sense went off, heads up. Someone yelled from above as a rapidly moving object shot towards Izuku's head. His hand instinctively moved and caught what looked like a heavy-duty wrench without even looking. Izuku easily held the wrench with his hand as he blinked in confusion. What the? Where did? I'm so sorry, they heard as they looked up to see a maintenance worker on scaffolding. I accidentally dropped my wrench. Are you okay? He asked as Izuku nodded. Why yeah, we're fine. He called out as turned to the now stunned Bakugos. What just happened? Mitsuki asked with shock as Izuku held the object in his hand, just as startled at her. He tried to let go, but the glare Bakugo gave him made him nervous and made his crawling ability cling the wrench to his hand. Actually Mitsuki, Inko said as she twiddled her fingers. I kind of forgot to tell you this, but Izuku has a quirk now, apparently, she said as silence reigned over the Bakugo family. The adults looked confused, while Katsuki looks more confused and enraged. Huh? They asked before a blood vessel appeared on Katsuki's forehead. Oi! Deku! Katsuki suddenly raged as Izuku's spider sense went off, as Katsuki marched towards Izuku, about to grab the boy's shirt, had he not moved out of the way. What the heck was that crap? Since when did you get a quirk? He demanded, small sparks igniting in his hand as Arie hid behind Izuku, who instinctively stood in front of her. Answer me you. That's enough, All Might said as he managed to stop the young teen. I feel as if this is a conversation best discussed elsewhere. How about we head to the food court? It wouldn't be wise to argue in the middle of the streets. Plus, he placed a hand on Bakugo's shoulder with a small grip. I hope you weren't about to use your quirk, young man. That would seriously jeopardize any chance of getting into a hero academy, right? Bakugo wanted to snap at the man, but for some reason, he felt like he couldn't do it. There was this familiar aura about him he just couldn't place. Something he respected. TCH. He clicked as he shoved the man's hand off his shoulder and then stuffed his hands into his pockets. Fine, but you've got some explaining to do, Deku. He growled as he marched to the food court. His parents looked rather stunned. Wow, I've never been able to get him to stop like that. Mitsuki said as she turned to Toshinori, you must be great with kids. She asked as the skeletal man chuckled. No, I'm just charismatic. He said as he coughed into his hand. All right, let's head to the food court. He said as they all went to the food court as Izuku sighed in relief. He looked down to Arie who still hid behind his leg. Hey, it's okay. Kachan seems like a mean guy, but he wouldn't harm you, promise. He told her as she reluctantly nodded. Izuku ni? She asked as Izuku turned to her, resisting the urge to heart clench when she called him Izuku ni. Why did he call you Deku? She asked as a pained look came across his face. It's not something I like to talk about, and not something you need to worry about, Arie. Come on, the others are waiting for us. He said as he held out his hand to her, as she looked at his face before nodding and grabbing a hold of it, leading them to the food court. Food court. The Midoriya family, plus All Might, sat on the table opposite of the Bakugo family as there was this nervous tension in the air. Mostly due to the heated glare that Katsuki was sending Izuku, as the boy withered slightly under his gaze. Are you going to say anything, or just keep glaring at me? Izuku thought to himself with sweat rolling down his head. Arie sat next to him as she ate the apple slices that came with her McDonald's meal. Mitsuki broke the tension as she slapped the back of her son's head. Enough with the glare, she said before turning to Izuku. Sorry, Izuku. Kachan here. She smirked when he gave her the stink eye for calling him by Izuku's cursed nickname. Was just curious to know how it is you got a quirk. From what we understand, quirks only manifest when children are 4 years old. How is it that you have a quirk now, after all these years? Not that we're against it, mind you. She said quickly as not to offend him, as Izuku chuckled nervously while Bakugo glared at him. Well, it turns out I'm a rare, late bloomer. The doctor misdiagnosed me because my quirk needed to wait until my body was physically suited for it. He explained, having made this plan up with All Might and Recovery Girl should anyone inquire about his past quirklessness. Oh, well that's good. What is your quirk anyway? Masaru asked as Izuku pondered. Well, I kind of have the abilities of a variety of spiders. I can stick to any surface, have heightened senses, lift objects 170 times my body weight, I can jump 40 times my body length, and I can turn invisible. Although it's not really invisibility, more like I'm altering the light around my body to make it less visible to the naked eye, which also affects my clothes. I do wonder if it has something to do with bioelectricity, but mumble, he quickly went off into his usual muttering as the Bakugo parents stared at the boy. There he goes again, Mitsuki said as Masaru chuckled nervously as well. Bakugo couldn't handle it anymore, especially when the words pelt his head, and he slammed his hand on the table. Enough, you damn nerd, shut up already. he yelled as he broke Izuku's train of thought. TCH, so your ability makes you like a bug, big whoop. Does that mean you she? He paused when he looked to Arie's childlike curiosity and held back the swear. Does that mean you spin webs like a spider? He asked as Izuku shook his head. He didn't swear, Mitsuki whispered to her husband. Maybe we should have another kid to get him to stop. Shut up you old hag. And you, he pointed to Deku. Answer the question. And no, nothing like that Kachan. I only got the physical aspects of a spider. I didn't get the biological specs. Otherwise, I'd have 8 eyes and 6 legs. And that wouldn't be a pretty sight. They all paused to imagine a 4-armed, 8-eyed Midoriya with horrific spider-like features. They all shivered at that. TCH, whatever. Your quirk is still weaker than mine. Bakugo claimed as he sipped his drink. And I'll prove it at the exams, so don't even bother trying. He said as he crossed his arms. Now that's not very nice, young Bakugo. All Might said as Bakugo glared at the man. Young Midoriya has every right to participate in the exam like any other student. It's not up to you whether or not he should compete or not. And I do not believe it's very heroic to deny others the chance. All Might told the young man, who grumbled, for some reason finding it hard to snap at the skeletal man. Seriously, who is this guy? Why does he seem so familiar? He screeched in his head. Besides, All Might said as Bakugo blinked. How will you know if your quirk is better than young Midoriya's if he doesn't participate? The only way to prove it would be to let him try to compete in the exam. And, if he succeeds, you'll have more opportunities to prove yourself. Wouldn't you rather have someone that will challenge you? If you don't, then your skill will stagnate, and I get the feeling that's something you don't want. All Might explained as Bakugo actually took the moment to pause. Until he clicked his teeth. TCH. No way. There's no way that damn nerd's quirk is better than mine. If what he says is true, it makes him more like a bug than a hero. He claimed as All Might laced his fingers. Really? Tell me young Bakugo, what exactly is your quirk? He asked as Bakugo held up his palm as small sparks and explosions popped on his hand. My quirk. Kachan's quirk is called Explosion. It allows him to excrete nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignite it at will to create explosions of various sizes. Izuku cut in, having long known about his quirk, and responded automatically in nerd mode. Don't explain my quirk you damn nerd. Bakugo exploded as Izuku flinched and flickered between invisible and visible due to his nerves. Ah, I see, that is a powerful quirk. One that I believe could make you a very popular hero. All Might said as Bakugo grinned. You bet, with my quirk, I'm going to be the #1 hero and surpass even All Might himself. Just you watch Scalator, he proclaimed as All Might internally chuckled, finding it ironic that the young man was basically seating in front of his idol, whom he claimed to surpass. Well, I've been helping young Midoriya for the past 4 months, and right now, I think he may be able to beat you. He claimed as a huge blood vessel popped on Bakugo's head. What? He yelled with rage. Oh boy, he's mad, Mitsuki said as she calmly sipped her soda, while her husband and Inko panicked slightly. All Might, what the heck are you doing? Izuku mentally screeched to the man who seemed to read him like a book, as he smirked. Trust me young Midoriya, he mentally said as he returned to the boy. But, if you want to prove me wrong, we can find out when the exams are over and when young Midoriya makes it into UA. That is where you plan to go, right? He asked as Bakugo flared his nostrils in anger before snapping them to Izuku. Deku. Izuku flinched at the glare. If you fail to get into UA, I'm going to beat you up myself. I'll prove once and for all my quirk is better than yours. But I doubt you'll even make it past the exam. He claimed as he stormed off to cool his head. If he wasn't born as a boy, I'd almost think he was Tsunader, All Might thought as he watched the young man walk away. Wow, you are good, Mitsuki said as she watched her son stroll off. Normally it takes a whole yelling match to get through to his skull. You have a talent, she said as All Might chuckled. Well, what I said was true, in a way. Young Midoriya has the right to participate, and young Bakugo won't truly know if his quirk is better if Midoriya isn't given the chance. Your son seems like a determined young man. And I think it would do him good to have some rivalry to push him on. He explained as Mitsuki nodded. I suppose you're right. My son has always had a large head, no matter how many times I tried to get it into him that he's not the center of the universe. Maybe UA will give him some perspective. But now I got a question for you, she asked as he nodded. If you're Midoriya's personal trainer, why are you hanging around the family after hours? That doesn't seem like something a trainer should do. Are you interested in his mother or something? She asked as blood rocketed out of his mouth while Inko choked on her tea. Izuku on the other hand looked like he fried a circuit in his brain. Mitsuki. What? No, I swear that is not my intention. Why young Midoriya invited me to tag along because. He started to panic, then looked to Arie. It's because young Midoriya wanted some advice on being an older brother to young Arie here. Seeing as he didn't have anyone around to teach him, I thought I would give him some pointers. He reasoned with a bald-faced lie. Really? You have siblings? She asked. All Might has siblings, Midoriya thought, only to remember he didn't due to a biography that listed no such family members. Not that there was much in it other than school and his hero career. Well no, but I had experience helping young teens in my youth, volunteering here and there, so I thought it would help young Midoriya if I gave him some pointers. He reasoned as Mitsuki looked suspicious but nodded. Fair, I mean it's not like his own father is around to teach him that sort of stuff. She said as all three of them, minus Arie who was no paying attention due to the coloring book she had, sighed in relief. Still, knowing Izuku, I'm sure he's going to be a great older brother. She said as Inko smiled at the praise. Although, there is something I've noticed since we've met, she said as she pointed to the girl. Does she ever smile? She asked as the three looked to each other with grim looks. Izuku, why don't you take Arie to the store over there? Inko asked. Get her to pick out something she wants, she said and handed her card over to him as he nodded and took the girl by the hand and led her away from the adults. It's not something we like to make public, but, due to Arie's former life, it seems that the people she was with didn't give her a proper home, and due to it she hasn't experienced much joy, Inko explained as the two Bakugo adults were stunned and saddened to hear that. I see, that poor child, she said as she looked over to the small girl timidly looking around while holding Izuku's hand. We're trying our best to ease her into a more comfortable lifestyle, but, Inko looked over to her adopted daughter with empathy in her eyes. I'm not sure what else we can do, she asked as the rest of the adults pondered. You know, Masaru said as he pondered. I heard that sometimes the best way to help children in her situation is to attend social events that help them to open up more. There's a festival tomorrow at Okazaki with a firework display at the end. Maybe if you took her there, she may start to forget her past. He suggested as they pondered that idea. It's a thought, but will it be enough? All Might asked as Mitsuki nodded. It may not be a lot, but it would be a start to help her. You can get her more help, but I think right now she needs to know what it's like being a child. Then just show her love and affection, something I know you can do, Inko-chan. After all, Izuku turned out okay, she said as Inko doubted herself for a moment before nodding. Okay, she said, as the adults agreed on the idea. Okay, we'll see you there, Mitsuki said as she and her husband got up. Wait, you're coming too? Inko asked as Mitsuki nodded. Of course, I know how nervous you can get, Inko-chan, and I want to be there for you every step of the way. She grinned before it turned into a softer smile. Besides, I know my son hasn't been the best of yours and I'm truly sorry for it, she said, knowing full well of her son's misdemeanor to Izuku, no matter how many times she tried to stop it. I know it won't fix everything, but I want to make up for my son's idiocy as well, she asked as Inko looked at her friend before nodding. Now then, she said before grabbing Inko's hand, startling the woman. Let's go find Arie-chan a cute yukata to wear, she said before dragging a panicking-looking Inko further down the mall, leaving All Might and Masaru Bakugo behind. You have an interesting wife, All Might commented as he nodded. Yeah, but that's why I love her. One day later, Okazaki, firework festival. Lanterns and stalls were open to the public as curious red eyes gazed upon the bright lights of the small festival held at the local shrine. Arie stood at the forefront of the group, wearing a cute white yukata with small red sakura flowers decorating the cloth. Behind her was her adopted brother Isuku, wearing his own dark green kimono. His mother in a similar kimono. All Might wore an overly baggy kimono, and the Bagwos in dark oranges. Except for Katsuki, who was wearing his shirt and shorts. TCH. Why the hell am I even here? I didn't want to come out to this stupid she. He argued before he was smacked on the head. Because it's Arie-chan's first time at a festival, and I want to be there for every step. Mitsuki replied back before smacking him upside the head again. So, stop being a whiny little brat. Who are you calling a brat, you hag? Now, please don't fight. Masaru begged his wife and son while the Midoriyas, and All Might, stared at them. Can they go 5 minutes without fighting? Arie looked around at all the stores, feeling nervous about being in such a large space. Until she felt a small comforting squeeze on her hand. Hey, it's okay Arie. I'll be right next to you the whole night. Okay. He reassured her as she nodded. Now, what would you like to do first? He asked, as she looked around before she pointed at the goldfish stall. Oh, you want a goldfish? He asked as she nodded timidly. Izuku nodded as he rolled up his sleeves. Can I try please? He asked as the stand vendor held out his hand. 100 yen, he told Izuku as he handed him a paper net and bow. Rules are simple, scoop a fish into the bowl and you keep it. Your turn is up when the paper net breaks, got it? He asked as Izuku nodded and prepared to fish. Hold up kid, he said as Izuku stopped. What's your quirk? Can't let you try and cheat me using your quirk, he said as Izuku nodded. Okay. My quirk is spider-like abilities. Heightened sense and wall crawling. He listed the basic as the man nodded. Okay, just checking. But I'll know thanks to my quirk, sense. Allows me to detect any quirk activation. He said as Izuku nodded and tried to win a fish for Arie. However, Izuku was never good at carnival games and had very little practice due to never being invited to go to the festivals. So, the chances of him winning one were slim. But, Izuku thought as his eyes became focused. As a big brother, I have to win one. For Arie, he mentally yelled and scooped at the water. And lost. Izuku hung his head in defeat as the paper net broke and he lost. Again please, he asked and paid the man, only to lose again, and again, and again. Costing him 300 yen. I've failed as a big brother. Izuku moped hunched down on all fours. Katsuki watched from behind him as grew more and more annoyed. Arg. You really are pathetic if you can't win a child's game. He yelled as he grabbed the paper net and paid the man. Okay kid. What's your kier? Small explosions went off in Bakugo's hand as he glared and scared the vendor. Alright, have a go, he said as in an instant Bakugo managed to capture 2 goldfish before the net broke, then shoved the plastic bag of goldfish into Arie's hands. Here. He growled as Arie was startled, and a little hesitant when they were shoved in her hands, looking up at him with confusion before he scoffed. Just take them, damn nerd can't do anything right. Just make sure you don't drop him, he said as she then stared at the fish in awe. Huh? You're really good at this, aren't you Kachan? Izuku said with amazement to which Bakugo replied. Of course, you damn nerd. I'm going to be number 1 no matter what, he yelled back as he started walking away with his hands in his pockets. He looked back as Arie bowed to him. Thank you, Kachan, she said as Bakugo's eyebrow twitched at being called his stupid nickname and was about to snap at her, but he couldn't as he stared into her big red innocent eyes and he merely scoffed and turned away. Yeah whatever, he said and walked away. That was unexpected. Mitsuki and Masaru said as they watched their normally aggravated son act calm. Shut up! He yelled, to which Mitsuki just laughed. The rest of the night went well as they played multiple games, buying masks for Arie and Izuku to wear. Izuku went with the All Might one as the real All Might snickered at the fanboy level of his successor. And Arie discovered her love of candied apples as her mouth drooled with delight and slowly, they began to notice her trepidation melt away. But the whole time Arie still had yet to smile. The corners of her mouth would twitch, but nothing. It was like her facial muscles had forgotten what it was like to smile. Well, she's starting to come out of her shell, Izuku noticed as Arie played with one of the toys won at the stalls. But she still hasn't smiled yet, he discussed with the adults as they nodded. If she wants to smile, She'll smile when she's ready. You can't force it on her, you damn nerd. Bakugo grumbled as sat away from the rest. While not as invested with the child, even he couldn't fully ignore her lack of joy. Yeah, I guess you're right, Kachan. Izuku sighed with slumped shoulders before All Might placed his hand on his shoulder. Now don't give up yet, young Midoriya, the night is still young. Who knows, maybe she'll smile once she sees the fireworks. I have never met a kid that wasn't amazed by fireworks yet, he assured Izuku as he nodded. He looked down to Arie as she held her hand, while not as hesitant as before, he could still see the fear that Chisaki had imparted on her. But at least she was looking around with more childlike curiosity and awe. Okay, the fireworks are about to start, why don't we? His spider sense mildly went off as he turned to see someone struggling to carry some boxes. The person didn't notice the spill on the floor and suddenly tripped. But faster than the person could blink, Izuku managed to catch the person and the boxes in midair all in a matter of seconds. That was close. Hey, are you okay? Izuku asked as he turned his head to the person. Only to suddenly go rigid and blush red as he stared into the face of a girl his age. She had brown hair, eyes, a round but cute face and two permanent-looking blush marks on her cheeks. She blinked as she looked at the boxes in his other hand. Oh wow, sorry about that, she said as she released herself from his grip. I wasn't watching where I was going and slipped on that spill there, thanks for catching me. Those were some pretty cool reflexes, she said with a cute laugh as Izuku found himself unable to speak and continued to stare with a rigid expression. Behind him, the others were staring at the interaction with some amusement. Thanks for catching me, I'm Ochako Uraraka by the way, she introduced, as Izuku just continued to stare, finding it hard to talk. But to her, it seemed like he was curious about her worker's get-up and the boxes she was carrying. Oh, you're probably wondering why I was carrying those boxes? Well, I'm helping out a friend of my parents to make some extra cash, money's a bit tight lately, but this way I can help out and enjoy the festival on my break, she said as she took the boxes from his still hands. Well, I should be heading back to work, thanks again and it was nice meeting you, she said as she walked away leaving Izuku to process his encounter. Holy crap. I just talked to a girl. You didn't say shit, you nerd? Bakugo yelled while Inko, All Might, and the others chuckled at the blushing boy, while Arie looked confused. Come on, we can poke fun at Midoriya later. The fireworks are about to start, and we need to find a good vantage point. All Might suggested as they nodded. They soon found themselves on a grassy hill overlooking the festival as they laid out a blanket and sat down. Izuku ni, what are fireworks? Arie asked, never having seen them before in her life. Oh well, they're kind of like, he pondered how to explain them to a young child like Arie. Tell you what, how about we just watch? I think that's the best way to show what they are, he said as he pointed to the waters where the fireworks would set off. At first, nothing happened as everything was quiet. Then suddenly a loud whistle shot up into the sky as everyone looked to the sky as the first firework went off in the sky. Its bright colors flashed and sparkled in the night sky, amazing all who saw it before slowly fading into dust. Only swiftly after followed by several more fireworks as they lit up the dark sky. Arie's eyes widened with awe as the loud sounds reverberated and the bright colors danced across the endless stars. Izuku smiled at this as he took the girl and lifted her onto his shoulder. She was slightly startled before her attention was brought back to the fireworks as they exploded and brightened up the darkness. The corners of her mouth slowly started to spread upwards as she was lost in the dazzling sight. Before a proud and happy smile spread across her face, the first one she had in a long time. Izuku watched as the small girl raised her arms in excitement as she and all the other children in the area cheered at the show. Izuku couldn't help but smile at this as he felt the darkness that had its hold on her loosen. Izuku ni, do you see that? They're going boom, and wah, and whoosh, she yelled out with excitement, unable to contain her joy. Izuku nodded as he smiled at her, small tears in his eyes. Inko herself felt tears in her eyes, nearly drenching All Might with them, as she watched the small child laugh and smile for the first time since she arrived at her home. Mitsuki herself was comically weeping and taking as many pictures as she could of the innocent child, while Masaru tried to calm her down. Bakugo leaned his back against the tree as he tried to ignore everything, but even he took notice of the child's excitement and felt a small tug at his heartstrings, before shutting them off and turning away. Izuku took this moment to stare at the small child that had effectively become his little sister and smiled seeing her happy. But of course, his mind drifted to Chisaki and the fact he was still out there, no doubt plotting to take her back by any means necessary. He clenched his fist as he shook his head. No, I'm never going to allow that to happen. No matter what, I will protect Arie with my life. I'll become the greatest hero ever, and make sure that no child ever suffers as she had. He silently vowed to himself. All Might himself vaguely thinking back to a time before when he and his master once watched a similar event before looking down to Izuku and noticing his expression. I know that look, young Midoriya, a look I know all too well. But fear not, I will help you protect her and help you master your abilities and one for all. He lightly coughed into his hand as blood stained the palm. Before my time is up. Both master and apprentice looked to each other as they nodded, both silently vowing to uphold the weight and responsibility of one for all. But for tonight, they just sat there and enjoyed the smile of one child that had seen too much darkness and relished in the light. Izuku Midoriya was fighting with strange men that flickered and sparked like images of light on the day before the entrance exam. The young man ducked, dodged, and eluded their attacks with his acrobatics, while at the same time retaliating with his own. Strands that resembled webs shot out of his wrists, holding onto the shape of one before Izuku used the web's tension to slam the man into the concrete, just for the man to fade into tiny bits of light. He kept fighting the hollow men, his body moving with dexterity and accuracy. He moved out of their line of attack by twisting his body, then struck with strikes so strong that they would have knocked out most men. The hard light dummy crashed into the ground, producing the intended result. When two of the hard light attempted to swing bats at him, his spider sense went off. He pulled their heads down with the strands and sent two blasts of webs to their eyes, blinding them. He smashed them onto the ground, then spun around and kicked the final dummy with great force. The final one attempted a punch, but Izuku blocked it and sent it flying into the air with a blow under its chin. But two web strands grabbed hold of its chest and slammed it back into the ground, shattering it into tiny pieces of light. Izuku looked around, realizing there were no more dummies for fighting, and got to his feet. The simulation has ended. As Izuku took off his mask and turned to face All Might, the room's projectors turned off, signaling the end of the simulation. All Might said, "Well, I think that was your best time yet," while glancing at his stopwatch. He said, 2 minutes and 33 seconds. "That beats your old time, young Midoriya," and Izuku grinned in response. He said, "Thanks, All Might," and removed his web shooters. "I think I can still adjust my reaction time if I modify the mask a little. I can also adjust my web shooters to disperse the webbing solution more accurately. I've sent the patent to the registration center so they should allow me to use them in the exam. But what if they don't and I?" Midoriya. All Might put a hand on his shoulder to halt his tirade. "You're going to be fine. Examinees are allowed to bring in items that benefit their quirks. The fact you made them yourself is evidence of your technical skills and abilities. And even if you couldn't use them, the examiners are going to be more focused on your practical skills. I can't reveal much about it, but I have a strong feeling you will pass," he assured him with a nod. "I'm just nervous, I guess," he sighed in relief. "Thanks. I mean, I've been waiting for this day my whole life. Ever since I was a little kid and I wanted to be a hero like you. At first, I never thought I'd even have a shot at getting into the UA, but now that I have that chance, I'm both excited and nervous. I'm nervous-sighted." All Might just stared until he erupted into laughter. The young man pouted and he laughed. "Oh, you are a riot, young Midoriya. You are headed to the United States of America by storm," he said in a tone that was almost paternal. Something that cheered Izuku up. "Now, let's practice one for all. Even though you've mastered your spider quirk, you still have a long way to go before mastering one for all. So, let's see how far you've progressed." Izuku crossed his arms over his chest and concentrated on one for all, nodding. His body was starting to glow slightly and his veins were all red. He cried out, electricity rushing through his body. "One for all. Full cowling, 10%. Start of the simulation. Izuku pulled his mask back over his face and launched himself into action, bringing the holograms back. His body smashed into hard light dummies with ease, moving like an electric blur. The hard light burst into particles of light, demonstrating his strength far beyond what he had previously possessed. In his full cowling form, he was much quicker and more nimble, easily dodging the bullets that some of the dummies were programmed with. He had used all of the training dummies to wipe the floor by the time it was over. Standing in the middle of the arena, he had a smile hidden beneath his mask. He said, "Time?" as All Might put the watch to sleep. Isuku nodded, and All Might said, 1 minute 15 seconds, that is impressive. I see you've gotten a handle on your full cowling. Isuku stretched slightly as his body stopped glowing and said, "Right now, I can use up to 15% without difficulty, 18% if I push it. But if I go any higher my body starts to ache, and if I go 100% my bones will break. Luckily with my healing factor, I'm up and about in a day or two. It's a good thing I figured out how to do this, otherwise I'd have never learned how to spread out the power." He was able to take control of about 15% of One for All in the months he had. At first, he could only direct One for All toward his limbs. He also messed up his combo during training because he was too slow to change the direction of the output. He saw on the news about a hero named Electric Man, who covered his body in electricity, and that realization that concentrating One for All in one limb wasn't enough gave him the idea to cover his body. He then set out to refine One for All, complete cowling, his new method. At first, he struggled to control full cowl, occasionally breaking a limb and hurting himself in drills. Had it not been for his healing factor, he would have sustained a more serious injury that would have caused him to miss months of work. But Isuku finally grasped One for All after a great deal of trial and error and an occasional subtle hint from All Might. "I reckon you would have gotten it eventually, young Midoriya. You're a bright young man, with an amazing talent and a drive like no other. You're more than ready for the exam," All Might said with a grin. "But don't think it will guarantee you acceptance into UA. You still need to pass the written portion of the exam and impress the judges during the practical. Not to mention I will not be a part of the judging process, so I can't vouch for you. From here on out, it's up to you if you get in or not." All Might laughed, and Isuku responded, "I understand All Might, and I'm kind of glad actually. If I get in that way, it wouldn't feel right." He grinned at the boy and said, "You're an honest kid, I can't deny that. But don't worry, you're going to do great. Well, that's enough for today. You need rest for the big exam tomorrow, and I know that a certain little sister is already missing her favorite big brother." Izuku laughed to himself, remembering his adopted sister. "Yeah, let's head home." She had gradually started to get over her fears in the months that she had been residing with the Midoriya family. She was too young to have her hair colored, and it was advised that children wait until they were older to have their hair colored. So she had taken to donning hats to hide her horn for her own safety in case any of Overhaul's men were trying to find her. She was still a little bashful when it came to meeting new people, but she smiled more frequently. When she did, though, she would give them a broad smile that could melt the hardest hearts. She found it challenging to adapt to a typical lifestyle. She was close to her big brother, and wanted to support him, so by that point, she had become a part of the family. She did, however, inherit some of Midoriya's characteristics, including her infatuation with heroes, her constant muttering to herself, and the waterfall tears that would flood the apartment whenever they watched a depressing film, particularly her older brother. These days, it was nearly hard to imagine his life without the little horned girl in it, something that strengthened his will to be a hero and warmed his heart. "Midoriya House," Izuku exclaimed, "I'm home," as he paused at the doorway to take off his recognizable red shoes. He heard the tiny girl's feet tapping and skillfully picked her up in his arms, a radiant grin adorning his face. Arie grinned and said, "Welcome home, Izu-ni," as Izuku laughed. She nodded and he said, "Good to be home. You've been a good girl while I was training?" I helped Mama Inko with the groceries after she picked me up from daycare, and I helped carry the bags home all by myself. We're having katsudon for dinner," she said as she described her day to him. He stroked her head tenderly and laughed. His smile disappeared as he headed towards the kitchen, saying, "Good girl, now let's go into the kitchen. I am starving." His mother, seeing her son and adopted daughter, put down the placemats. When Izuku nodded, Inko said, "Oh, Izuku. How was training today?" "Training was alright. All Might was really helpful getting my moves down. I still need to readjust the web shooters and I'm still working on integrating the electronic HUD into my goggles. but I need more components to fully integrate the software and hardware, and then need to calibrate the. As he blinked, his mother, Isuku, was able to interrupt him. She grinned and he said, "Oh, sorry, but yeah, other than that, he says I'm a shoe-in for UA." "Oh, that's so great, honey. I still can't believe All Might of all people is helping train my son. It makes me so proud of you. I just wish I could tell everyone." She breathed a sigh of relief as Isuku. "You know we can't, Mum. We have to keep it a secret for his sake, and truthfully, I'd rather not have people found out All Might was training me. They'd accuse me of getting into UA because of him and then no one would take me seriously as a hero." He argued with her as she nodded. Izuku nodded and she said, "If you say so, dear, now. Why don't you relax? Dinner will be ready soon." Izuku then left for the shower. Though he was still contemplating the deception he was hiding from her, and the reason he was unable to inform her about One for All. His mother had learned of his covert training relationship with All Might, but she was unaware of his other quirk. Not that she wasn't in danger because of Overhaul, who would return someday to get Arie, but it was for her own protection. But she was still safe as long as no one else knew about One for All. He leapt from the shower, sat down at the table, and started fidgeting with his web shooters, which Arie looked on in fascination, glancing from time to time at one of the devices. Izuku unintentionally let go of a tiny ball of web from the shooter, and it struck the wall, making her jump a little, extending outward like a big web made by spiders. While Arie hid beneath the table, he said, "Whoops, well, at least the net filter works." Izuku shrugged his shoulders and Inko yelled, "Izuku, what have I told you about meddling with your web shooters at the dinner table?" He repeated, "Not to," having heard it several times since he created the items. "Sorry, Mum. I guess I'm still a little nervous about tomorrow. I want to make sure everything is ready. This is my one chance to get in and I don't want to mess it up." Izuku sighed, feeling a twinge of doubt. Her frown deepened. Before he saw a warm smile on his mother's face and felt her comforting hand on his own. She said, holding his own with a smaller hand, "Izuku, you will be fine. I know I wasn't very supportive back then and I said something I shouldn't. But I believe you will be a great hero. Just like you believe you can be, just like she believes." Arie looked up at him, grinning. He grinned and turned to face the two most important people in his life. "Thanks, good, now. Put that stuff away and help put out the plates. We made your favorite today, and you're going to need all your energy for tomorrow." "Okay." Izuku grinned and cast his gaze around the table, remembering the people in his life. His idol who believed in him, his little sister who looked up to him, and his mother who now supported him. He never would have imagined having a quirk, someone to support him, and an opportunity to show what kind of hero he could be nearly a year ago, but that opportunity was now his. And he was not going to waste it in any way. On exam day, UA Academy, the towering H-shaped structure of UA Izuku Midoriya stood in front of Academy and stared in wonder. Many applicants were advancing toward him in an attempt to pass the difficult entrance exam and gain entry into the esteemed halls. He had visited the Academy before his powers awakened, but he could never quite get over how ridiculously amazing it was to be here. However, having All Might's instruction and supervision did not ensure that he would be admitted to the Academy. He had to establish his worth, and he intended to do just that. He clenched his fist and told himself, "I promise I won't let you down, All Might." A voice called out, "Oi, Deku," as he turned to see his old friend and current rival wearing his trademark scowl. Bakugo Katsuki. Ah, Kachan. Although he was no longer as afraid of Bakugo as he once was, the years of psychological torture the young man had inflicted on him had made him react to him instinctively. "Stop acting like a nerd by loitering around. I'm going to prove which quirk is better," he growled as Bakugo pushed past him. Izuku laughed nervously as he said this. "That's Kachan for you. He doesn't let anything hold him back," he grinned and looked up. "Which means I shouldn't too," he exclaimed as he made his first audacious move toward his new life. And after that he fell down on his own 2 feet. Just as he was about to catch himself, he thought to himself, "Really, universe?" Before realizing that he was floating in midair and that he had stopped falling. "Is this a new aspect of my quirk?" he asked himself before realizing that there was someone standing next to him. "How are you doing?" As she put him back in the standing position, a young woman's voice questioned, "I apologize for using my quirk on you. But I thought it would be unlucky if you fell on your first day, don't you think? She inquired as Izuku stopped and blinked a few times before turning to face the girl in front of him. It's fine, I was paying attention and, he said. Until his face burst into a flushed memory of the fireworks festival. Oh no. It's her. The nice firework girl. He thought to himself in a panic as she gave him a somewhat familiar look. Hey, you appear to know me. Have I previously seen you somewhere? She asked, glancing at his face. Ah, we met at the Ozakai Fireworks Festival a few months back. His mental brain kicked himself. I believe I saw you tripping there, Izuku. That's me. Midoriya Izuku. He managed to find his voice. No, not that, now she'll think we're weird. She nodded and gulped. Oh yeah, reflex guy. Thanks again for that, you were awesome. I'm Ochako, by the way. Ochako Uraraka. No problem, she said. Well, good luck on the exam, as she passed his dumbfounded figure. I just spoke with a girl once more, this time, for real, haha. He gave himself a mental high five. It's going to be an incredible day. The auditorium as they took their assigned seats, all of the examinees moved into the spacious atrium-like hall. Izuku saw that Bakugo was sitting next to him, but the other boy just gave a growl and a sideways glance. Yes, it was an incredible day, he mused to himself as he faced the stage in his pro-hero and UA outfit. Mike the teacher present entered the stage. Present Mike yelled, expecting a response. Welcome everyone to the UA entrance exam. Now everybody say, hey. But there was silence. Izuku was fanboying about the loud hero, so it was almost silent. He muttered to himself, oof, tough crowd, and then started coughing into his hand. Now, welcome you young hopefuls. I see a whole lot of potential here, but sadly only some of you will be making it into UA. This will be determined in our 10-minute battle royale, where we will place you in a replica city with you against a bunch of villains. Your goal will be to take down as many villains as you can and earn points. Each villain is worth a certain point. Present Mike clarified while displaying 3 distinct enemy types with 1P, 2P, or 3P on the monitor. It appears that despite our serialized numbers, the examinees are assigned at random. This means that individuals from the same school cannot take part, observed Bakugo, who, along with Izuku, had a single-digit difference on their cards but were placed in separate zones. Izuku at Beta and Bakugo at Alpha. Izuku felt sweat trickle down the back of his head and he cursed to himself, TCH, means I can't crush you in the exam. Kachan, you really should take a break, Izuku told himself. Izuku exhaled in relief as Present Mike said, now of course you can take whatever you like into the exam, handmade or otherwise if it helps you or your quirk. But there is absolutely no attacking other players. That's a big no-no, he would not be disqualified for using his web shooters. As he stood up, a tall boy with dark hair, glasses, and a somber aura around him said, excuse me, Tenya Ida. May I ask a question? Go ahead, Present Mike commanded. On the handout, there are clearly 4 types of enemies, yet there are only 3 so far on the monitor. Is this a typo? Because such an error would be a clear embarrassment for such a top-tier academy as UA. Tenya said while pointing to the handout. He abruptly pointed to Izuku and said, and you? Izuku recoiled at the charge, but he insisted, you've been muttering and fidgeting to yourself the entire time. It's highly distracting. If you think this place is some pleasure jaunt, then please leave at once. Okay, he thought to himself, rude. This time, he was a little more self-assured as he scowled at the overly serious child. His older self would have apologized and pulled away. His resolute statement, sorry, but I'm not here for kicks, I want to be a hero, just like you and everyone else here, briefly startled Bakugo and Ida. Okay, settle down you two. And examinee 7111, it's not a typo. The 4th villain is worth 0 points. They're more like arena traps than anything. They will randomly rampage across the city and your goal for them is to avoid them at all costs. Ida bowed, I see, I apologize for the interruption. Before resuming her seat, not before giving Izuku one last glare. Bakugo muttered to himself, guy takes himself way too seriously, must have a pole up his ass or something, while Izuku merely laughed to himself. Do you have personal experience? Now, that's enough from me. But before we send you off to the battlegrounds, I want to impart some final words onto you. The school precepts, if you will. A true hero never stops overcoming the misfortunes of life and continues regardless. To go beyond what you know and go plus ultra, he yelled as he grew more focused on exceeding. Now good luck, and don't die. Wait, what was that last part? Beta testing of training ground. The new examinees soon arrived at their designated training area, all of them in awe of the enormous expanse and depth of the field. It appeared as though a whole tiny city had been built and installed inside the school. Isuku looked and felt a tinge of nervousness as one of the examiners remarked, "Wow, UA really goes all out, don't they?" To the point where his body glowed with invisibility. He inhaled deeply. He told himself, "Relax, you can do this," as he looked over his web shooter and made sure he had enough extra cartridges packed. However, as he was fishing around, he felt a little paper note in his pouch and took it out. "Izuku ni, let's go. We are circling around you, Arid 3. It was obviously written in crayon, misspelled, and had sloppy handwriting. But even as he smiled and tucked the note into his pocket, he knew how much it meant to Arie to know he had it. He adjusted his equipment and thought to himself, "Thanks, Arie, that's just what I needed," when he saw the girl from earlier getting ready mentally. "Hey, that's her, Ochako, I think. Maybe I should go over and say hi, or would that be too weird?" "Hey, you." A hand unexpectedly touched his shoulder as he turned to face Tenya Ida, the serious child dressed in a skimpy running suit. He remarked, "I hope you're not planning to go over there and distract her," as Izuku successfully passed him the handoff. He looked around, saw people muttering about him, and said, "No, I'm not. We met a few months back and again this morning after she helped me. I just wanted to wish her luck, not distract her or anything. Because like I said, I'm here to become a hero, just like everyone else. Isn't he the kid that stumbled on his feet this morning? Guy doesn't look that impressive, this will be a piece of cake." He could hear them praising him and expressing gratitude for not viewing him as a challenge. He had a goal, so he didn't care. To become the hero his sister needed him to be, and the hero All Might thought he could be. As Izuku pulled the mask over his face and adjusted the lenses, he thought, "Don't focus on what others think, just do what needs to be done. And start." The sudden loud voice caused everyone to blink and appear confused. "What, did you think there'd be a countdown or something?" "Wrong. There is no countdown in real life, move it." Izuku shot a line of web and swung his way into the city, briefly leaving behind him as everyone stampeded before he could blink. "This is going to be a piece of cake. I'm going to get the first villain." "No, me." The other examinees charged at a gang of villains, shouting. Ida was more concerned with scoring the most points than keeping up with them. He saw 2 2-pointers, 1 3-pointer, and 4 1-pointers. He and the others looked up to see Izuku swing past them on his web, but all of a sudden he felt a shadow pass over his head. He launched a web of his own at the first pointer and hauled himself toward the adversary. He crushed the robot's head like paper with his fist. After that, he turned around and gave someone else a strong downward kick, smashing it into the ground. He turned around, shot web lines at the 1-pointer, and destroyed the robot by tossing it into a lamp post after his spider sense alerted him to an impending attack from behind. Then, dodging another blow, he used his web shooters to fly over to the final 1-pointer and buried his fist in its chest. As they watched Izuku destroy a robot with a single blow, one of them remarked, "Hey, wasn't that the kid from the front this morning?" Then Izuku concentrated on the 2 2-pointers, who were shooting rubber bullets at him. He easily evaded their attack thanks to his spider sense and acrobatic skills, shooting 2 globs of webs at their eyes to temporarily blind them. Then, with superhuman strength, he smashed the metal of one of the blinded bot's eyes with his fist, shattering it like paper. He then snatched one of the metal plates off its leg and threw it at the other, chopping off its tail like a scorpion. He joked, "Tails, I win," as the robot staggered back. "Wow, that kid is awesome, I'll say. Maybe he wasn't as weak as I thought he was?" A boy who sounded French commented, "He does have some flair and grace with his moves. Magnifique," after observing Izuku for a while. One of the enthusiastic students exclaimed, "Arg! Damn it! I need to find some points," as the other students nodded and began splitting up to find their own points. Ida gazed for a brief moment before shaking his head and hurrying away to secure his own points. He could not be humiliated in this examination, especially with the reputation of his family at stake. Even Ochako was staring, and for a split second, she thought how awesome he was, before she pursued more robots and realized why she was here in the first place. Isuku, in the meantime, leapt into the air, fired 2 lines of web into the 2-pointer that had already been destroyed, then swung it overhead and struck the final 2-pointer with force, completely taking down the villain bot. A rocket blasted past his head and he looked to see the 3-pointer with its 2 massive missile launchers on its back before his spider sense went off before he could catch his breath. Whoa! Does the UA actually take these tests seriously? He exclaimed, watching as the robot rearmed its missiles and launched another shot. He whirled in midair, fired a web at one of the rockets, and swung it back at the robot as he swung towards the villain bot, his webs missing him just in time. The robot staggered back, and as the rocket smashed into its face, he yelled, "I think this is yours." One and all. Complete cowling, 5%. Subsequently, Isuku engaged full cowling, causing his body to flare with neon green electricity. Using a web line, he descended quickly and collided the robot with the ground, leaving a small crater with a large, dented machine in it. Isuku got back up and narrowed his lensed eyes as everyone stared in stunned awe. He then fired a web line and swung away to find more robots, saying, "Okay, that was 11 points, not bad, now to find more." Observation of teachers as he watched his apprentice take the lead in the beta section, All Might couldn't help but sneer. The boy proved that the months he spent honing his spider powers had been worthwhile when he swung around, took out more robots, and unintentionally defended others from unexpected attacks. As the other teachers assessed the candidates' performances, he thought to himself, he doesn't know it, but already he's proving himself as a hero. We've got a lot of young potentials this year. They're taking down all those bots like they're nothing. They are impressive, but the test isn't just about taking down as many villains as possible. This test also shows off their insight, their agility, their judgment and of course their sheer fighting prowess. As they observed on the monitor how he evaded their attacks and his swift action of preventing other robots from attacking his fellow examinees, one of the teachers remarked, "But you've got to admit, the kid with the webs is pretty impressive. I don't know if he's doing it on purpose or not, but the kid so far is showing a good awareness of others around him, protecting them from harm and even environmental damage. He's definitely earned some rescue points for that." Perhaps. They pressed a large red button and tipped over a glass box. But let's see how they'll react to this. Beta for Battlegrounds. Isuku fired a web shot at some debris, threw the debris at another 1-pointer, and leapt off the back of another 3-pointer to slam his fist into another 2-pointer. Gazing around at the continuing fight between the examiners and the villain bots, he leapt onto the building's side. "Okay. That's another 3 points, that makes it 40 points so far, okay. This is working out great. But it looks like the number of robots is thinning out here. I need to head off and find more." Abruptly, he sensed the building trembling due to cables breaking and distant small charges exploding while the earth rumbled. He and the others turned to face the noise, saying, "Ah, that's not good," just as a huge metal hand grabbed the building's side and a massive robot loomed over the group. Izuku and everyone else stared in stunned horror, and Izuku's lenses went wide. Izuku exclaimed, "Isn't that a bit much?" as the robot's fist swung back and crashed into the earth, creating a massive dust and wind gust. He screamed, "Shit," and used his wall-crawling ability to stick the building. However, his eyes grew wide when he noticed small pieces of debris falling in the direction of the other examinees. "Oh no!" he exclaimed, swinging out to launch web nets at the fragments in an attempt to catch them before they could topple the other pupils. Turning to face the students, he landed atop a lamp post. He turned back to the 0-pointer and swung towards the machine, yelling at them, "Everyone, get out of here. I'll try and hold it off." Ida stood there for a moment, and then he turned and fled the altercation. The instructor made it very evident that it was best to avoid facing the 0-pointer as it was useless. However, why does this feel off? As he observed the masked Izuku swinging toward peril, he asked himself. Izuku fired several globs of webs at the debris to prevent any of the students from being hit as he swung towards the 0-pointer. While the students seized the opportunity to flee, the webs gathered the debris into enormous, spider-like webs and adhered them to the buildings. Izuku looked between the students and the zero-pointer as he landed on the building's side. He thought to himself, damn it, it's taking nearly all my cartridges just to keep it still, and then he saw the machine's wheels. He ejected the spent cartridge and loaded a new one, saying, need to stop it from moving. Then, he swung between the debris and headed toward the treadmill's zero-pointer's tracks. The zero-pointer stopped in its tracks, thick webs globbing up the gears. The thick webs held the zero-pointer in place, and it looked down as its wheels came to a stop. As Izuku tapped on the glass and peered into its large robotic eye, it felt something on its face. The giant tried to swat at him, but it hit itself in the face with its own hand. Having some technical difficulties? Don't worry, it happens to everyone, he joked. He swung away in time with some web, saying, seriously, you tried swatting me. That's a little on the nose, don't you think? As the giant's arm crashed into the structure, he cried out, you're causing a little too much damage, big boy. The robot was covered in web, so Izuku unloaded as much of it as he could at its arm and attached it to the building's side. As he replaced the spent cartridges and adjusted the spent ones, he joked, there, now stay still and think about what you've done. 2 minutes left. Present Mike exclaimed, beaming at him. Okay. 2 minutes left. That's good, everyone is almost out of the way. Maybe I can find just a few more points in. Ow. He snapped his head down upon hearing someone yell, and his lenses widened upon seeing Ochako Uraraka stumble over some debris and struggle to stand up from her overuse of her quirk. Uraraka! He exclaimed, then focused on the zero-pointer, which had freed itself from the webs and was headed straight for her with a hand. No, he cried out, diving headfirst in her direction. He accelerated in her direction as full cowling took over his body. Ochako closed her eyes and tried to protect herself by shielding her arms, but as the villain robot's hand crashed down on her, she looked up. She felt herself being grabbed and hauled into the air, though, rather than being crushed by the metal. She opened her eyes, gazing down at the synthetic city beneath her and the material of a dark green tracksuit. Her expression was one of confusion before she grabbed onto the person who had just saved her. She cried out, what the heck, as she and her rescuer leapt high into the air. A recognizable voice asked, you okay? As she turned to face the boy in a mask who had just saved her. She shook her head and he asked, did you get hurt? That's good, I'll find you somewhere safe and, shit, hold on. The zero-pointer had turned to face them and swung its fist at him when he was interrupted. Ochako screamed as the fist hurtled towards him, appearing to slow down time. Izuku channeled 100% of One for All into his right arm at that precise moment, causing his web shooter to explode from the energy and his entire body to become covered in green electricity. His tracksuit sleeve also tore. The zero-pointer's fist nearly hit the pair as Izuku swung his own fist and let out a high-pitched scream, Detroit. Smash. Before the sound of tearing metal, twisted steel, and large explosions resonated louder than most, flesh and metal collided with a powerful shockwave. The entire right section of the robot was reduced to twisted metal, and everyone watched in utter shock as the zero-pointer was literally blown in half. The red optics of the zero-pointers cracked and flashed red, then died and fell into the street. Izuku gasped as he observed the devastation. That was unexpected. At that point, they started to fall as gravity caught up with them. His right arm was red and swollen, and he gasped in pain as he attempted to shoot a web line. Oh shit, he cried. Shit. One for All must have been too much for my body to handle. Oh no, I can't hold her and shoot a web line at the same time. Shit. As he and Ochako fell, he cursed to himself. Only to halt abruptly in midair. Huh? He asked Ochako as they hovered over the city, above the mayhem beneath them. What is happening? He turned to face Ochako, asking, are you okay? As her palm was resting on his chest and her 5 fingertips briefly turned pink. Aha. I feel a girl's hand on my chest. Not at all. Not significant. Concentrate. He snapped out of his daze and nodded. She nodded but appeared to be exerting herself. Yeah. This is your quirk again, right? You can affect gravity, right? He asked. Are you okay? Izuku looked at his right hand and cursed, but I'm fine. But if I overuse my quirk, I get sick. So do you think we can get down safely? She said. She nodded, trying not to blow chunks, but said, no good, my right arm and web shooter is completely busted. I can't hold on to you and swing us to safety. If I could switch the setting on my left to shoot a web net to catch us, we'd be safe. But I can't with my right hand busted up. He nodded, considering his options and making a plan. And not to be a pain, but I don't know how much longer I can hold us in the air, she said. She nodded reluctantly, then he asked, okay, do you think you can switch the setting on my web shooter? She questioned, oh okay. How do I switch the setting? As Isuku waved his left arm. She nodded, and he said, there's a switch on the side. It should look like a spider's web. Do you see it? Flip it to that, then hold on tight after you deactivate your quirk. She nodded, then flipped the web shooter's mode and put her arms around his chest tightly, making Isuku blush even more beneath his mask before he aimed his web shooter downward. She nodded and he asked, you ready? Okay. Do it, he exclaimed, allowing gravity to return to them as she pressed her fingertips together. The two fell to the ground, and Isuku aimed his web shooter at the earth and fired. When the two touched down on the surface, the glob of web shot out, raced toward the ground, and then burst into a massive net-like web. The web bounced a little under the tension, but eventually settled, and they exhaled with relief. He asked, that was close. Are you okay? And Ochako nodded, turning green in the face and covering her mouth with her hand. Then she started throwing up rainbows and sparkles as she leaned over the side. Blar la 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 la, she exclaimed, causing Isuku to wince a little while giving her a supportive pat on the back. There, he asked, relieving her discomfort with a back rub. Present Mike yelled, time's up, as the two blinked. That's it for this year's entrance exams. We'll be posting your results in the next week, good luck. He remarked, oh yeah. Completely forgot we were in an exam, as Ochako used her sleeve to wipe her mouth. Yeah. Got a little caught up in the moment, she remarked, to his amusement. As he cradled his arm in his chest, she asked, are you okay? Your arm looks pretty banged up. I'll be fine. I've got a healing factor, so this should be all healed up by tomorrow morning. As Recovery Girl entered the scene, they both turned to face the voice, who said, or I can heal it for you now, young man. He stood up and said, Recovery Girl. While deftly navigating the internet, Ochako appeared perplexed as he exclaimed, I forgot you would be a part of this. You know her? She asked, making Izuku cringe in fear that he might have revealed his secret to Recovery Girl. No, I just recognized her. Why yeah, she was a famous healing hero back in the day, and I read an article that she took a job at UA. I'm kind of a hero fan, he said while the elderly lady laughed. Smooth save, young man, she muttered to herself before clearing her throat. He nodded, and she said, well, I am the school nurse after all. Come down so I can heal you both. She was about to object when he grabbed her up in one arm and leapt off the web, landing soundly on the ground. Here, let's get down, he said. He said, there we go, taking off his mask to show her his freckled face and green hair. Ochako said, recognizing the face from this morning, it's you, Izuku Midoriya, right? From the entrance and the fireworks festival. Sorry I didn't recognize you before, what with the mask and all. He sighed with relief and said, it's okay. I'm just glad we made it out of there alive. Up until he felt lips on his cheek and something green all around him. The other students watched in disbelief as the elderly woman kissed the young man, only to notice later that his arm was healing quickly, returning to its normal color and shape. Izuku waved his arm, saying, that's so much better, thank you, Miss Recovery Girl. She just repeated herself to Izuku in order to hide their involvement from the others. Take it easy young man, I healed you, but you need to take it slow. My quirk heals you, but it takes some of your stamina to do so. That goes for the rest of you, she told them. Here are some water and some nausea tablets for you, dear, she said to Ochako, who nodded appreciatively. She left Izuku and Ochako alone, saying, okay then, if there are any more, please line up and I'll deal with you all eventually. Ochako nodded and then turned to face him. It's a good thing she's here, huh? Otherwise, this would have been hard to explain to my mum and sister, he remarked. Tell me about it. My parents would have freaked out if I got injured by a giant robot. But I guess that's what's to be expected of a hero, huh? She said while nodding. When he turned to face her, she said, Thank you by the way, for saving me back there. You didn't have to do that, you know? Well, what was I supposed to do, let you get hurt? That wouldn't have been very heroic, would it? Then she countered, but you probably lost time getting more points trying to rescue me, and he shrugged. She looked at the boy admiringly and smiled, saying, it's fine, I got around 40 points, so I don't think it will affect me that bad. Plus, if I didn't try and rescue you, then I don't think I'd be able to call myself a hero, would I? No, she said, I don't suppose so. She nodded. Isuku scratched the back of his head and blushed at her endearing smile. But still. Thank you, I owe you, she said. She nodded and he said, well, last I checked I think we both saved each other, so how about we just call it even? She said, deal, knowing exactly what had to be done. By how did you do that before? You completely wrecked the robot with one punch, that was amazing, she said while blushing. Well, it wasn't that big of a deal, really. Weird, you were a lot more confident a second ago? Well, that might be due to the mask. It kind of helps me focus and hides my fear a little. Ochako put on the mask and exclaimed, whoa, I can barely see anything. The two struck up a conversation. Wait, don't put that on. It's probably all sweaty by now. Ida, meanwhile, continued to watch the boy as he continued to ruminate on past events. I don't understand it. We were told to stay away from that zero-pointer since it was useless and would only impede our progress. While he was safe and out of its way, he went up against it, protecting everyone else from its attacks even though everyone else had the common sense to flee. He examined as he considered the instance in which Isuku saved Ochako, saying, he even risked himself to save that girl without any hesitation. To be honest, I would have jumped in myself if it hadn't been in the middle of the exam. Ida swore to himself and stopped. Is that, perhaps, the point? But if that's the case, then that means. He turned to face Isuku, who was blushing a little from Ochako's praise of his deeds. A week later, the Midoriya house. Isuku anxiously awaited the exam results while hanging upside down on his web. His hands were occupied with his web shooters while he fiddled with the apparatus's mechanisms. Additionally, he had to construct a new one in order to replace the one that was destroyed during the test. Since gaining his spider powers, he had been doing it frequently, and it strangely helped him distress. Nonetheless, relaxed would be a kind remark. Maybe if I alter the pressure gauge, that could produce more webbing. No, then I'd have to adjust the cartridge size and recalibrate the circuits to compensate. These are bully enough as it is. I need to see if I can redesign them to minimalism space without sacrificing the quantity of the web fluid. But what if I? He stopped muttering, Izuni. You're doing it again, and turned to see Arie reading one of her favorite children's books while perched in a web hammock he had made. Sorry Arie. I guess I got a little carried away there. It's just something I do to take my mind off things. He nodded and she asked, about the exam. Why are you worried? It's just an exam, right? Well, the exam is supposed to tell me if I made it into UA or not. If I did, I could become a hero. If I didn't, well, I'd have to try somewhere else, he clarified as she gave a small nod. She said, don't worry, you'll succeed, in response to his furrowed brow. He asked her, how are you so sure? As she got off the hammock and held up her arms. She said, because you're my hero, as he grinned, climbed out of the web, and gave her a tender hug. Thanks, Arie, that helps. His door suddenly flew open, letting Inko stumble into the space. Izuku. Izuku. It came. It's here. Letter, UA. As Izuku picked up the envelope, she let out a shout that was equal parts nervous and excited. He, along with his sister and mother, waited tensely for Izuku to muster the courage to open the letter while they all gazed at the sealed envelope. He inhaled deeply as he opened the letter to reveal a tiny puck-shaped device before a hologram materialized in front of them. As he materialized in the hologram, All Might exclaimed in his hero form, "Greetings, young Midoriya." All Might! Cry Inko and Izuku, just as Arie is able to quickly cover her ears. I know what you're thinking, is this supposed to be from UA? Well, if you remember, young man, I have applied as a teacher here. Sorry, it took a little while to finish up the paperwork. But now I can. I have to speed this up. How many more of these do I have to film? That many? Oh geez. Arie was just curiously pawing at the hologram, while Izuku and Inko thought simultaneously, maybe they should have edited that out. Inko grinned proudly as he said, "Now, for the written portion of the exam you did remarkably well. I suppose that extra time you had to study paid off?" Izuku raised an inquiring eyebrow as he said, "As for the practical exam, well, I must say, young Midoriya, you continued to surprise me in every way possible. You took down a total of 40 villain points, and that alone would guarantee you entry into UA Academy. But let me ask you something, what is a hero's real duty?" Izuku considered it for a moment before his eyes grew wide with realization. If a hero's job was just to beat up the bad guys, then we'd all be nothing but a bunch of thugs with superpowers. No, a true hero's duty is to protect the people around them, to shelter them from the tyranny of evil and chaos. During the exam, you demonstrated this well, knowingly or otherwise. Then again when the 0-point villain appeared, and you bravely drew its attention from others. And let's not forget when you saved that young girl's life from the 0-pointer's wrath," he explained with a grin. "But that's not all. Take a look here." The image of Ochako abruptly shifted to show her meeting present Mike. Excuse me?" Izuku cried out, blushing on his cheeks. "You Uraraka?" Arie said, "Hey, isn't that the girl you met at the fireworks festival?" As Inko turned to face her son, her eyes wide with happiness. The boy in the exam earlier, he had messy hair and a plain-looking sort of face. Izuku Midoriya," he exclaimed, "that's me." As Inko became concerned about her son's reaction to her description of him as plain-looking. I was wondering if it's possible to give him some of my points." With both Izuku and Inko staring at her bewildered, she asked, "Why would you want to do that? From what I gathered, he earned quite a few points in the exam already." Present Mike had inquired, his face sporting a slightly sardonic smile. "I know, but he risked his life to save me. He would have earned more points instead of trying to rescue me. And I can't just accept that. So please, give him some of my points, to make up for the ones he lost. Please." She bowed to the man and begged. He turned to All Might, who grinned and paused the video. "In the short time you've had your quirk, you've already inspired others to greatness. Tell me, do you honestly think that a place like UA wouldn't be looking for qualities such as these? That's where you're wrong, young Midoriya. This is why they also graded you with rescue points. And guess what? You earned a whopping 75 points. Plus, young Uraraka, who earned 65 points. Combine your 40 with the 75 rescue points and you earned 115 points. Putting you at the top of the leaderboard," he said, as Izuku stared at the projection in stunned awe and the man smiled at him from the projection. As the projection ended, he said, "Welcome, young Midoriya, to your hero academia." Izuku turned to face his mother, a smile slowly spreading across his face before tears welled up in his eyes. As Inko gave her son a hug, tears also welled up in her eyes. They let out a joyful laugh and sob as they rejoiced in his victory. As her brother wrapped his arm around her, young Arie gave him a big embrace as well. Their tears almost filled the apartment. She said, "Izuku, I'm so proud of you," and Izuku grinned back. "Thanks, Mum." Izuku would celebrate this milestone alone because it marked the start of his journey to become a hero. His mother inquired abruptly, "So, who's this Uraraka girl?" As his face flushed and his invisibility began to take effect. "Mum, Omake. Run." Izuku was unwinding in his room, grinning broadly at having arrived in the United States of America. On his first attempt, he was accepted into his ideal school, putting him one step closer to realizing his dream of becoming a hero. It had finally paid off. All those hands-on training sessions, months of study, and months of developing his web shooters. He intended to attend the UA Academy. The school was well known for producing some of the world's greatest heroes. Furthermore, he was able to leave a lasting impression on the judges, earning the top spot throughout the entire exam. When he applied, All Might had a perfect score of 200 points. Few people have ever been able to surpass 98 or higher, so it was a difficult record to break. Now, Izuku Midoriya was most likely the second individual to ever achieve a high score. A great score, first place. His eyes suddenly snapped open upon realizing. "Oh!" A familiar voice cried out as loud banging began to reverberate from his front door. "Where is he? Where is that insignificant, high-score stealing bug? Shit, Kachan. I totally forgot about him, you know." He gave a mental yell before his door was violently pounded. He cried out, "Deku! I know you're in there." As Bakugo attempted to smash through his door, Bakugo dashed in, bursting through his door. "Deku!" he exclaimed, looking around the room but seeing nothing. He barked as he looked around the room, "Deku, I know you're in here. Come out." Above him, Izuku clung to the ceiling, slipping out of his line of sight, much like a spider evading its meal. Then Katsuki looked up at the ceiling, but there was nothing there. While Deku was hiding in the tiny crawl space, he strolled past his desk. And he was gone as soon as Bakugo snapped his head to the crawl space. Then, just as Izuku's head popped and Katsuki snapped at them, he walked past his drawers, only to come up empty-handed. He swore and scanned his surroundings for the boy that was now desperately clinging to his back. Then Bakugo jerked back, spinning around and sensing his surroundings, only to come up empty-handed. Sweat trickled down his brow as he cursed and kept looking for the boy, who was standing right in front of him and totally invisible. He growled, "Where the fuck are you?" just as his mother stormed into the room. The boy snapped at her, "Oi Katsuki! Don't be rude, you little twerp!" she cried. He paused when he noticed an inquisitive Arie staring at him. "Shut it, you hag. I'm not leaving until I find that score-stealing fuck jerk," he exclaimed, just before Mitsuki seized his ear. She dragged the boy out by his ear and yelled, "Don't care. You came second. It's not the end of the world. Come on, we're going home." Then she turned to smile politely at Inko. "I apologize to Inko-chan. We'll cover the cost of the door," she said, tugging on the boy's ear. "You were in so much trouble, you little brat." He screamed and kicked and said, "Let go of me, you old hag." As he was hauled off, Masaru trailed his wife and son after apologizing in a kind manner. Quote. Izuku materialized next to Inko and Arie, astonished by the strange sight as he had used his invisibility to shield himself from his enraged childhood friend. Quote. I think I'm going to stay home tomorrow." "Very good idea, honey," Arie said, looking confused, to which Inko replied. "She just said, cry baby," as Izuku laughed at his sister.
I will continue this story in next part. Till then, bye bye.